Guys, thank you so much for joining us here on Herp House Rock. We got a new podcast that we're getting going here, and there's no rules, so this is how we're going to do it from now on. We have Vin Russo, so stay tuned. You guys are going to really enjoy this one.
You're gonna actually do something there, but okay, Ben, this is a broken record on this one. Everyone comes on this, it's always the same question.
Right.
How did it all get started? What was the beginning? What got you into reptiles? What started the business? What grew the business? Just talk our ear off for a little while.
Well, I don't think I got started any differently than anybody else. When you're a kid, you're either the it factor. You're either into it or you're not. You're either into reptiles or you're not. So as a young kid, I was hooked very early, probably like 3 or 4 years old, finding anything, bugs, snakes, frogs. It was probably most likely frogs and toads as a kid growing up in suburban New York. So, and then from there, snakes, garter snakes, DK snakes. Eastern milk snake was the grand prize if you found one. And we did, surprisingly, as a kid, even in neighborhoods, you found stuff like that. So I got hooked real early as a really young kid. And luckily in college, no, not even in high school, I met a bunch of kids that were really into reptiles. I mean, these guys were nuts over reptiles. And we all became fast friends and worked in a pet shop selling reptiles, a place called Ed's Aquarium in Farmingdale, New York. I was 15. I lied and told them I was 16, but to get the job. And I convinced the boss to sell reptiles there because I had them, and I figured, we're at a pet shop. Why aren't we selling reptiles? And I don't know if you guys know a guy named Mike Ellard, who was Burgundy Reptiles down in Florida for the longest time.
Mm-mm.
He's been out of it for a while, but back in the 80s, in the mid 80s, and early 80s, he lived here in New York, and he would drive around in a station wagon and peddle reptiles. So he came to this pet shop, Ed's Aquarium, and he had a station wagon full of snakes. And what he would do is he'd go down to Florida and pick from all the wholesalers down there, Strictly and the Shed and whoever else was available. And he'd drive that stuff back up to New York and sell it at pet shops. And I told my boss, I'm like, this guy's got some cool stuff. We gotta get it, and I'll set it up and we'll sell it. And we did. From what I recall, the weekend after we bought a bunch of stuff, I think we sold it all. And it was like, one boa, one corn snake, one anole, stuff like that. And the guy that owned the place, Ed, it was called Ed's Aquarium. He was impressed. He was like, wow, you guys sold all those reptiles and everybody bought fish tanks with them.
Mm-hmm.
And gravel.
Yeah.
But it was, it was the olden days. It was the 80s. And
I have a question. Did he have like music playing with the whole, reptile car and all that? Like an ice cream truck, but like reptiles. That's what I'm picturing.
It was like a beat up old green station wagon. It looked like it was barely held together, and he'd show up with a bunch of cool stuff, and I would buy stuff for myself, So I can't say that's when it started, but that's when the notion of, wow, people buy these and there is an economic value to them,
Mm-hmm.
And then later on, my brother and I had a pet shop in the late 80s, 87, 88, 89. It was called Exotic Specialties. And we were buying stuff from Tom Crutchfield and from Gary Sibley on the West Coast and Louis Porras and also, all the Florida guys. Lloyd Lemke was selling stuff back then. So was Philippe de Vogely and Bob Mayhew. They had a company called D&M Reptile. And we would buy from all the guys that we knew and sell we were trying to do captive bred stuff at that point. Even though there was still a lot of wild caught stuff, there was some little bit of captive bred stuff coming in. And that's when I realized that the real trick to this business is captive breeding. You know, captive breeding is the Noah's Ark of the future. And I saw really early on that the wild caught stuff wasn't going to last forever, and that it really wasn't fair to be taking all these animals out of the wild. I mean, I would see shipments of thousands of tokay geckos. Like, what are you going to do with thousands of tokay geckos? You know? So that's when I figured out breeding was where it was at, and stopped doing all the importing with my brother and went into captive breeding. And that was probably 1989, 90, something like that. So that's how it started for me.
So with Cutting Edge, when was that established?
Cutting Edge was established incorporated in 1997. My brother came up with the name. He always would make a joke, Vin, you're on the cutting edge. So
Good name. I like that.
good name, yeah.
And that's almost before Dave was born.
No, he was selling reptiles before I was born, but you know, it was early days. But yeah, so I had these guys stalk you a little bit beforehand. You know, they know of you, but they weren't totally sure on what all you worked with. And
Right.
I haven't actually been on your Instagram page in a little while, and even I was blown away by a lot of things that you had going on right now that I had no idea you even worked with. I mean, a lot of them are kind of like pet projects, just because you wanted to do them for the sake of doing them. It looked like the Viper boas I saw you had going this year.
Yeah.
That was really unique. Was it Northern Pines? I think you just posted a couple days ago, which I thought was really cool. But so I guess okay, I'm gonna give you a good pat on the back really quick. We try not to do this too much on this show. We don't want to be
One per episode.
I'm gonna put a little ass on, and then we're gonna kind of go from there. I will say, from the amount of diversity that you have in your collection, whenever I talk to new people getting in, I'm always all like, don't get crazy, pick a species. And I know it's come up a bunch in this podcast. I mean, you work with a lot of stuff, and you, from what I can tell, have been successful with a lot of different species. Have you always done this all on your own? I know you've had some partnerships along the way with, I think maybe the hognose and corn snakes, and I'm sure some other projects. But I mean, are you just doing this all on your own in one building? You got a couple employees right now?
I just do this all by myself in one building. Yeah. I've kept it that way because of multiple reasons. Security, number one. It's really hard to trust people that come into your building and work. I've been on my own doing this pretty much the whole time. I've had problems in the past with robberies. When you've got good stuff, people want to rob it. So when I had the retail stores with my brother, we got robbed probably 4 or 5 times. Wow. And so when I started breeding on my own, I kind of went underground. I had one robbery when I was breeding stuff out of my house, and they didn't get anything. They still broke into my place, even with 2 dogs barking, and that just bothered me. So I can't say I went underground as far as being a business. I went underground as far as never letting people come to my facility or pick things out or be a retail establishment. It was always private breeding facility. I'm doing this on my own. I don't have employees, putting stuff in their pockets too. So, if I get busy, I might have one of my kids come down and, clean water bowls for a couple of days, and I'll pay them or stuff like that. But I like being a one-man show. I like doing it all by myself. And I did have a partner with the hognose and the corn snakes for years, my friend Rich Hume. But he retired, like literally retired from his full-time job, and also wanted to retire from snakes too. So he and I split up last summer. We split up the collection of snakes we had. And, we're best friends. It's not like we were like, oh, this is a split up and we're not talking to each other. He literally turned 65 and was like, I'm done. And I couldn't blame him, So that worked out great, though, because we did a lot of things together on the corn snake and the colubrid side, which I always was doing. I always had the first snakes I ever bred were Cal Kings when I was literally a child, So, and then corn snakes and pine snakes later on. So, you know, I do have a diversified collection, but I'm a herpetoculturalist too. Everything I have are things that I like. You know, I'm world renowned for boas and writing a book, a few books on boas, which are my passion. But the things that really get me going in the morning are my little pet projects, like you were saying. It's you know, I have sand boas, I have pine snakes, I have blood pythons, I've got skinks, I got all kinds of things that I just like doing.
Man.
Which is awesome. Like you said, sometimes it can be a handful working a lot of different species. You know, even God, when I got into this hobby, I think I bought a pair of everything. I was going to the White Flame show. I think it was like every 3 months or every 4 months in the early 2000s when I started going. And yeah, I'd go one weekend and I'd buy a pair of Brazilian rainbow boas. Then the next time I'd go, I'd buy a pair of Burmese pythons. And then I'd buy a couple more boas and a couple random ball pythons. And, you know, I just never really found a way to be successful having all those animals in a small environment when they all kind of needed something special. And it wasn't until, like you said, because I'm the same way. I'm in love with boas. Boas have always been my drive in the hobby. You know, it wasn't until I kept it, I simplified it. I picked up a really nice lipstick albino from Tom Burke. And I picked up 3 hypos pos het for albino from Rich Isle. And of course, 1 out of the 3 ended up proving out. And I used that money to reinvest it. And that was kind of the building point for me.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, we are definitely starting to get into more species now just because it's hard not to. There's always something we really want to work with. But like I said, I always really just drive it home to people that, you know, find something you're good at and then slowly move into other things because you can get really discouraged in this hobby if you're not successful at it.
Oh, yeah. I mean, I'm not going to be the guy who says, you know, do what I do. I only do it because this is full time for me. You know, this is 9 to 5 every day. I'm working on my snakes and my snake building. So I started doing this full time in 2001. Prior to that, I was a mortgage banker. I did mortgage banking on Wall Street for many years. So, you know, this to me is easy. You know, 9 to 5, I drive 20 minutes away to my building. I work the whole day and I come home. And, you know, prior to that, you know, being in the corporate world, it was sitting in traffic 3-4 hours a day and, you know, killing myself to make money. So this is not, again, it's not easy making money. To me, this is easy taking care of snakes, you know? Mm-hmm. So, but, you know, it's funny you mentioned that, you know, having so many things, you worry about keeping so many things in the same environment. There's a bunch of things that I got out of because they didn't fit into my environment. You know what I mean? It's like, for example, I used to do crested geckos, and I used to do some of the Leachianus too. And my building's way too hot for them. It just didn't work. You know, I had to get rid of them. I used to do monitors. The problem with them is they're too hot. They create too much heat. So, and my electric bill was ridiculous. And at the end of the year, I looked at, for example, I did the Acanthoris, the ridgetail monitors. I did those for years. And back then, there was no dubia roaches. So I had to buy crickets, you know, and they eat every day. Mm-hmm. So I remember doing them for a couple of years. And then one year looking at my electric bill and my cricket bill and seeing the difference between my electric bill with the Ackies and my electric bills without the Ackies. And at the end of the day, it was costing me money to do Ackies, you know, between the food and electric bill and all the heat they were creating.
And how many did you have?
I had, let's see, I probably had about 5. I had 5 little colonies of them going. Okay. And they really were just sucking up electricity. The electricity where I live is ridiculous. The cost of it. So. Now, a guy who lives Florida or someplace warmer where they don't have, you know, look at Ron St. Pierre. He does everything outside in the sun. So I can't do that here. So. But
no, again, you know, work with what you can. You know, like you said, Florida guys have it really lucky. I mean, you know, we have iguanas up here, and we've been trying to cycle them. And I think even Ty Parker talked about how he built a greenhouse in Chicago in hopes of breeding iguanas, green iguanas mainly up there. And as far as I'm aware, he was never very successful with it. It is, there's, of course, like you said, the perks of living in Florida, having the opportunity to keep everything outside. But the negative of living in Florida is you have to deal with the fact that you live in Florida with all the laws that keep popping up. You're kind of like your own little country down there.
Right.
Yeah.
But like I said, the monitor stuff I've always really loved, and we just got a black throat, and we have some of the Pulveras and stuff like that in the house just for fun, and you have to keep them aside of some of the other ones. But yeah, like you said, work with you can in your environment. If it changes everything, it's not worth having around.
Right. Right.
One of the benefits of being up kind of in the north is for us, we have to brumate, our blue tongue skinks and a few of our colubrid stuff, and it's much easier for us to cool down a room than if we were in a place where it's always hot, or at least doesn't get down as cold, so
oh yeah,
there's some benefits.
Yeah, and the cool thing about up here with the colubrids is now, again, colubrids for me, corn snakes, pine snakes, king snakes, they're not in the boa part of my facility. They're in my office because in my office I have it air conditioned, so I can keep it at 80 degrees. If you keep a corn snake at 87 degrees in the warehouse, they just burn through food and don't gain weight, and they just wither away. So it's like you gotta figure out what works best in your little microclimate environment that you create. And for me, it was all right. The office, I'll keep the incubators and the corn snakes and the king snakes and the pines, and in the warehouse, I'll have the boas and the pythons and the skinks. But the skinks go in with the corn snakes and king snakes and pine snakes in the winter to hibernate. Well, brumate, we'll call it. They only get down to 60 degrees or whatever, 55, 60.
Mm-hmm.
No, we're the same here. Corn snakes, the hognose, and the blue tongues all go in the same room for the cool down, no matter where we've lived, and everything just comes out when it's got to come out. But we talked a little bit about your book prior to doing this. And I hate to say, I wish I knew more. Was it a rewrite, an edit, or did you go do a whole new book?
No, it's a whole new book.
Okay.
We also still used a lot of the text from the first book, but everything was updated. And even we added a couple chapters. One of the chapters was on taxonomy, which changed considerably in the last 10 years due to DNA sequencing. So that was like the most important part of the book, because the nomenclature, boa constrictor imperator, boa constrictor constrictor, boa constrictor sauvage, all that was changed. All the 9 subspecies of snakes will boil down into 3 species. So now boa constrictor imperator is boa imperator. Boa constrictor constrictor is boa constrictor. Then one new species arose from all the DNA sequencing in northern Mexico, and they named that boa sigma. And that created some confusion because everybody considers sigma as an old taxonomic name of the snakes from the Tres Marias Islands off the coast of, which is the west coast of Mexico. But what the herpetologists did when they did their DNA sequencing is they found the snake closest to the geographic range of these snakes with a particular gene markers. They picked boa constrictor sigma as the snake that was described within their range, and decided to use that as the new species name, boa sigma. Although it's not, again, the confusion was, that's the Tres Marias Island boa. No, now it's the boas from the northern part of Imperator's range or boa range to the Isthmus of Tehuantepec, which is like a bulge, like an hourglass bulge into Mexico down further south. So that range on the west coast is now boa sigma, which is Sonora Desert boas, Tarahumara boas, and I can't say that that I figured it out. I didn't, but years ago, a local herpetologist wanted shed skins. I met her at White Plains. She wanted shed skins from lizards to do DNA sequencing. I said, well, I don't have lizards. I have boas. I can give you all the boa sheds you want. And I gave her Tarahumara boas, Croquet boas, Sonora boas, stuff that I knew where they were from, Cape Cockers, Corn Island, mainland Colombian, and Constrictor. And she did the DNA sequencing with her class. It was like a classroom activity. And she came up with, years ago, she showed me her findings that those boas from Tarahumara differed from the boas in, I'm going to say like Croquet by 5%. So you and I differ from chimpanzees by less than 2%. The boas, these boa sigma, differ from Imperator by 5%. So
that's huge.
Yes, it is huge. And she came on to something pretty big. And I said to her, you do realize that, now we can maybe name one of these snakes a new species. But, a lot of these academics are really busy with other things, and it's so much work to put it all together. Mm-hmm. So a couple of years later, a few other PhDs did their own sequencing with Dr. Scott Bobak. He's a guy I've been friends with a long time. He's been working on Croquet boas. He got his PhD dissertation on island boas, and he came to the same conclusions. And he did a paper with a bunch of people that he knows, and so then it was brought out into the scientific world of that there was now three species of boas. So to go back to the book, there's a whole chapter on that. So a lot of people are like, oh, why am I going to get this book? I already have the first one. There's a whole chapter on taxonomy. Every single chapter was updated as far as, just bringing things up to date. So each one was rewritten, meaning I rewrote them with all the newest things in each chapter. So it's a new book.
Oh, that's awesome. No, it's really cool. I'm definitely going to pick that one up. I have the other one, of course. Always like kind of skimming through it every once in a while for fun, but I'll definitely get my hands on this one. What was I going to ask about that? So these two guys don't know a whole lot about boas. So I'm sure me and you're going to be doing a lot of the back and forth here. Whenever I talk to people in the industry and they're asking for like random localities and pure animals, typically I'm always sending them to you. You're the only guy that I know that has such a diverse collection of different locality boas, different island boas. Do you have... How many do you still have to get your hands on? Because I know you got quite a few different animals you work with over there, boa-wise.
I have everything but Nebulosus and Arophius.
Okay. How many total are there?
Well, if you go by the original nomenclature, there was 9 subspecies, but as far as localities, it could be crazy. Now, Arophius and Nebulosus were not included in that DNA sequencing study, and it's believed that they may be their own species also. So a lot of people just call them Boa nebulosus, Boa Arophius. So I don't know how many races of boas there are. There's so many that nobody's found yet too. Mm-hmm. But as far as species, there's just 3. Nobody's gone into the subspecies part of it yet, though. So that could be a whole nother thing.
Oh, for sure.
Yeah.
So you guys want to sneak a little something here, or I don't want you guys not to have an opportunity to jump in and talk a little bit.
There's lots of stuff. I mean, I don't know about lots of stuff. I mean, there's from some of the stuff you work with. So we do mostly ball pythons, but we also do blue tongue skinks. We do old world rat snakes. So we have our hands in a bunch of things as well. Not as many as you, but we see that you had children's pythons, but you even have like birds and fish. And how many birds do you have? If I want to get off of birds are close to reptiles, really, but.
Well, I was breeding English budgies for many years because they were just something I really liked. I mean, they're the large, larger size budgie. And I had a pet shop distributor that was buying them from me. So I was making them for a couple of years, more than a couple of years. And that chain went out of business. It was called Petland.
Yeah, I know Petland.
Petland, I worked for Petland in 1986 and 87 when I was in high school. Well, 1986, I guess. And the owner of Petland, his name was Neil Padron. He was a real smart businessman. He had a beautiful chain of stores. I mean, at one point, I think he had 200 stores on Long Island and New York, New Jersey, Connecticut, and maybe in Florida. But Neil passed away last year, but he was an older gentleman. I mean, I think he was close to 80, and the company just folded up as soon as he passed away. But what I'm getting at is they were buying all the English budgies, so I had nobody sell them to. So I ended up selling my colony to a breeder that breeds them also and has other ways of doing them. So I don't do birds anymore. But it was just for fun.
So one more thing in bonsai trees. That's something you've been working with for years?
Oh, yeah, my whole life. Yeah.
Whole life. And that's something that you're also very well known for in that community, almost as much as in this community.
Yeah, I mean, if you look on YouTube, you'll see me doing demonstrations with local bonsai societies. And
Wow.
that's my father was a bonsai artist. He's 90 now. He doesn't really do it anymore. But he learned about bonsai when he was stationed in Japan during the Korean War. And he brought it back with him, meaning the knowledge of it, the little bit that he saw in Japan, and he was floored by it. It just blew him away. And in the 60s, he started taking classes in the Bronx Botanical Garden with a bonsai master named Yuji Yoshimura and another one named Frank Okamura. And when I was a young kid, I met these men and was very impressed with them too. I mean, they were Japanese bonsai artists. And my father learned from these two masters. He had a best friend that learned with the same masters, and that friend of my father started a bonsai, I guess bonsai studio. So when I was probably in my early 20s, I was an apprentice there, and I learned, paint the fence and wax the car. It wasn't like that, but it was doing very tedious things for the master, sweeping the floor, cleaning the benches, defoliating the leaves off the trees at a certain time of year, and wiring the trees. And I got to the point where I started assisting in his classes and then teaching the classes. And from there, I've always had bonsai as a hobby for myself. So that's something I've been into a long time.
Did you have to hang down a cliff and pull one out, of the cliff face, or?
No, but it's funny you say that because I went to a convention in Europe and the Europeans were bragging to me about how, and here in Europe, everybody owns the forest and we just go there and we get whatever we want, 1,000-year-old muco pine hanging off the mountain. I said, where I live, if I hang off the mountain and take a tree out of the national forest, I go to jail.
I couldn't let you just make the Karate Kid reference without me being able to add one in.
It was a classic moment.
Yeah.
Cool. So kind of go anywhere with this. I kind of want to talk about some boas some more though, because I don't get to talk about as much as I used to.
Talk boas, man. I want to hear about boas.
Yeah.
I love boas. I kept a pair like 10 years ago. It was a tragic story, and I haven't had them since. But I'd love to hear all about boas. So let's go.
Well, I guess one question I have, and from my experience over X amount of years, is a lot that we learned with some of the early literature on seasonal breeding and everything involved in it. And I'm not sure, are you ambient in your building, or are you still running heat underneath the tubs?
No, I have to run heat.
You do have to run heat, right?
Yeah, I don't think anybody can get away with just ambient temperatures for boas. Boas need to thermoregulate. They need to get on heat and get off of heat. They need to know where it is and find it and get off of it. It's funny you mention that because the first time I went down to Florida, it wasn't the first time. It was one time I went down to Florida and visited a couple of friends that were breeding snakes down there. One of them used no supplemental heat. He was, he had a really hot attached garage to his house, and he did okay with breeding boas. For the number of snakes he had, he was being, lucky getting litters. And I remember, looking for the heat and saying, where's the heat? He's like, oh, we don't even need it here. We're down in Florida. The room's warm enough. But he did have problems with slugs too. So he wasn't as successful as I thought he was. Because then when I saw the number of snakes he had compared to the number of litters he had every year, it wasn't that big a deal. So my belief is boas need to thermoregulate. They need a heat source. And even if you're in a warm environment, another friend of mine, Gus Renfro, he lives down in Brownsville, Texas, where it's even hotter, much hotter than Florida. And what he does is he does something similar to me. He air conditions the building to get it down to an ambient temperature that's comfortable for the snakes, 80s, mid 80s. And then he gives them a supplemental heat, a hot spot. So it's like you're kind of contradicting yourself by adding heat and taking it away. But if you're in a hot environment, you have to do that. Boas do horribly in heat, horribly. I mean, I know this because I had one of the buildings I rented for years was like a tin can, and that thing would get so hot, and the boas hated it. They looked like they were melting. It was so difficult to cool it down. So having no heat and getting them too hot is not good.
So
it's just my opinion. You don't have to hold me to it.
Well, for each their own. Some works for some people, some don't.
Right.
But
Like if you
don't have enough experience, we're not going to argue with you on this one.
I don't live down there, so I don't know. If I did, I would have to make it work.
Well, Missouri, it's hard to say. We had brought all the boas down here last year. We didn't even really do many pairings this year, to tell you the truth. And we do have half the collection on ambient, and the other half that the grow-ups and everything we still do with belly heat. But, for the most part, the building sits at like 82 to 84. And like I said, we didn't really do the breeding this year. I've been hemming and hawing and putting the heat panels back on them. I wouldn't say the animals have necessarily looked uncomfortable, but, again, we're not cycling right now. But, we're probably going to start our pairings in a few months. So it's definitely a sign that we're putting consideration into before we get rolling again. But so the other thing I wanted to bring up, because somebody had asked about this after one of the podcasts, the size and the age of an animal. I feel like you more than anybody else has been breeding animals at a little later on at like 4 to 5 years, but almost half the size of what the traditional books would say they'd have to be. Can you tell us a little bit about how that started and a little more about those?
Well, a lot of people are in a big rush, as you know, especially ball python guys. They all want to raise things up fast. They want to get production out of them quick, and it doesn't work with boas, And I learned that a long time ago. I learned that slow growing them is the way to go, and everybody knows it now. It's like I didn't divulge a big secret because you see so many guys they'll post a litter from my 6-year-old boa. This is her first litter. That's the way it's supposed to be. They should be 5 years or more. And you don't want to, if you read my book, you'll see that there's an entire chapter on seasonal feeding. Boas in the wild, and the only reason why I know this is because I've been there, and like you guys are saying, I breed fish and birds. Fish and birds are no different than reptiles. In the Amazon basin, or even in any tropical rainforest, fish, birds, reptiles all go through seasonality, and the seasons are wet season, dry season. If you're on the equator, they could fluctuate in temperature maybe less than 5 to 10 degrees for the whole season. So it's not necessarily temperature induced, but it's definitely dry season and wet season. And during the dry season, there's not much food, and it's not as much humidity, not as much water, not as much heat. It's a little cooler, depending on where they are. I mean, some mountainous species, like cloud forest animals, it could get pretty cool. In the forest of Costa Rica is 55 degrees. But what I'm getting at is when it's the cooler, dry season, they're not eating. They don't eat at all. So to feed your snake every week for the whole year is doing the snake the hugest injustice for its metabolism, for its kidneys, for its heart, for its fat layers. You're killing it. So I try to depict what happens in nature. My birds did the same exact thing. The way birds breed is they need a cool, dry season where they're getting just dry seeds. And in the spring, in the summer, you feed them fruits and vegetables and new seeds that are wet or more moist. You give them more protein in their diet. And there's tricks that bird breeders use. Sometimes they use puppy food and they mix it with the seeds. But what I'm getting at is that that influx of food, the warmer temperatures, the high humidity, puts them into egg production. Same thing with reptiles. So if, for example, with boas, I don't feed them at all in the winter, at all. I mean, from the time I put the males with the females, which is usually sometime in January, till the females give birth, they're not fed a thing. And that could be 6-7 months.
Wow.
So they're only fed once they give birth, then I start feeding them. And I usually feed them like they would eat in the wild. For example, a boa is going to give birth, for me, they give birth any time between July and September. Once they give birth, I wait a few days and I'll feed them a small rabbit or a really large rat, depending on the size of the snake. Just to give them one big meal to absorb. And then I'll give them one nice meal every 3 weeks, a big meal, something that leave alone. And then later on, I'll, depending on how much weight they need, or I'll trickle feed them to start getting them into breeding mode again. But that's their feeding season and their non-feeding season. So to get to your question about size and age, when you feed them that way, they don't grow very fast.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so it could take them, because again, even though I'm not breeding the young ones, the yearlings, the 2-year-olds, the 3-year-olds, they're still on the same feeding regimen as the adults. Mm-hmm. So it takes them 4, 5, 6. Some of the constrictor I breed 6, 7, 8, 9 years before they breed.
Wow.
Such commitment, man.
You're so I mean, one picture that always stood out to me of a gravid boa was the picture you posted of Suriname,
right?
And you had your hand over top. About how much did that animal weigh before you bred it?
You know, I didn't weigh it. I should have, but it was just a few pounds. I mean, maybe it's the size of a ball python, maybe 3 or 4 pounds.
And how old is that animal?
In that picture, that animal was like 6 or 7.
Okay. Wow. So what's your biggest Suriname or your biggest Argentine you have in your collection?
The Argentines get big. They're probably the largest of all the boas. I'm going to say your average size adult is over 8 feet, you know, on the Argentines. The other bigger snakes are those Peru constrictor, the Quitos and the Pacalpa Perus. They get pretty big too, just as big, 8 feet or more. But that's a big old snake. Yeah. They will breed smaller, but they need the size to breed.
What size litters are you getting out of the smaller, like that Suriname that was just a few pounds you were saying?
7 or 8.
Yeah. But at that size, you know, putting the weight back on them is way easier than some of these 15, 20-pound boas that you really have to not power feed, but you have to give them a lot of meals to get the weight they lose.
Yeah.
It's not that hard.
And, you know, that's why I was telling you about thermoregulation. If your room is left at one temperature and you got a real big clunker, if that snake can't get to 90 degrees to digest food, it's not going to digest it as efficiently. It's going to just run right through it, and it's not going to get back that muscle mass that it lost and that fat that it lost from giving birth. And again, it's slower. You know, a boa in the wild is going to eat a big meal and sit for weeks and digest it. It's going to get in the sun if it needs to absorb it faster, or it's going to just absorb it a little bit at a time, and it's going to absorb every bit of nutrients from that prey item because it doesn't know when it's going to eat again.
Mm-hmm.
Feast or famine. In captivity, if you keep feeding things every week, their metabolism starts to get used to that, and it just runs right through them. You're just wasting rats. It's just, you might as well just keep pumping them with a plunger and just have it come out the other end, because that's what you're literally doing.
Do you think that is similar to other species, not just the boas, or is you keep a handful?
I used to breed Burmese pythons, and they were the same way. I mean, if you fed them a lot, they shit a lot, and but I breed ball pythons, and I breed a lot of ball pythons. And the thing with them is, and you guys have probably noticed this, there's a certain time of year when a ball python is got a very good feeding response.
Mm-hmm.
And that's when you feed them. You feed them as much as they'll eat, because they will naturally go off of food and stop eating for the 5-6 months out of the year. So when they are feeding, you got to really feed them. And that's how they get their weight back on. It's hard to overfeed a ball python. I don't know if you guys have ever noticed that, because they do just stop, especially a breeding ball python.
Oh, yeah.
A female that's laying eggs annually or semi-annually, it's pretty hard to overfeed that snake. A young male that you're not using for breeding yet, you could overfeed and get fat. But the males, I barely feed. I keep them small enough to fit in, V35s, because I just don't want to waste a lot of space on males. But yeah, this theory works on pretty much all reptiles. I mean, look at skinks; they're the same way. They need that break all winter. If you don't give it to them, they get really fat, and they will not produce good babies. But it's that break all winter, feed them in the spring, they breed right away. The females get gravid, give birth to babies, and then they start all over again. If you fatten them up again, and you wait till the winter, and then they stop for a few months. So it's that cycle. You have to create that feeding, non-feeding cycle for everything.
Fun. Cool. You guys have anything before I start going again?
Well, are you going to keep going with boas, or you want to?
Well, I was going to talk a little bit about some of the South American trips you've taken over the years. I know you've probably done this quite a few times. I have no idea how many, but I've seen a lot of pictures over the years. So you want to talk about some of your experiences going down there?
Yeah, I've been down there a couple of times. I've been to Peru, Ecuador, the Peru-Ecuador border. I've also been to Costa Rica, Nicaragua, all looking for boas and taking temperatures and checking humidity. And, I haven't gone in a while because my wife and I had kids and we took a break from it. But we used to travel every year to someplace crazy. Went to Galapagos.
Nice.
But Ecuador was probably one of my best trips. I met some serious herpetologists there, and serious an Ashuar Indian who was a shaman who took me looking for boas and knew exactly where to find them. I had been looking for a week or two and didn't see one, and met up with this native and showed me a boa within an hour. So. And the cool thing about these people is these indigenous people is they're part of the ecosystem. They know exactly what's going on. It's no different than you or I, taking somebody in our backyard and knowing where the last time you saw a garter snake or a tree frog, and stumbling upon it. But these people have an entire ecosystem, which is the Amazon basin. And to be in it, you really it's something you got to see in your life if you're into reptiles and you're into breeding snakes. Understanding where they come from and how they live is where it's all about,
Mm-hmm.
But this one particular native that I met up with, he handed me a boa, and because they pluck it out of a tree, and he's like, he didn't speak English, but he spoke in Spanish to an interpreter who spoke back to me, because I had a guide who had a guide, and that guy knew the shaman. So he handed me a snake, and he said, "What do you think the gender is?" And I pulled the tail through my hands real loosely, and I could feel there was no hemipenes. I'm like, "Oh, it's a female." And the guy looked at me in amazement, like, "How did you know that?" So I said to him, because he knew it was a female. I said, "Well, how did you know it was a female?" And the interpreter says to him, and he looks at me, and he says, "It had a feminine demeanor." All right. Guess you're right. We're both right.
What was the craziest story you had from when you were down there? Like anything surprising, or you get into a situation where you've all of a sudden realized you were in over your head or anything like that?
We were out one night looking for reptiles, and it started pouring rain. So we were pretty much almost lost. We didn't know where we were. And you're in the rainforest, you can get turned around fast, and you're done, right? But anyway, it's really late at night, and we're stumbling to find our way back, and we're probably 2 hours from our camp, and we find a snake. And I was with a bunch of scientists, and they knew I was a reptile herpetological type of guy, and they were busting my balls like, "Vin, why don't you pick up that snake and tell us what it is?" Now, it looked unfamiliar. It could have been a new species. I didn't know what it was. It was similar to like a tricolor king. And, one guy was joking, saying, "Red on yellow kills a fellow, red on black, friend of Jack," or, that whole thing. And I said, "Yeah, but that all bets are off here. That doesn't work here."
Yeah.
Can't go by that. I remember saying to the one guy, "Are you going to carry my 215-pound ass 2 hours back? If I get bit by this thing and I'm dying." So I'm not taking the chance. Take all the pictures you want, but I'm not picking it up. Because they were kind of like, "Oh, you're the snake guy. Why don't you pick it up?" Picking it up.
So looking back on that find now, do you know what it was?
No, I don't. I don't have the faintest idea. We even took pictures of it. I don't know what it is.
That's really cool.
Yeah.
I think that's cool.
So,
Go ahead, man.
Ryan, you haven't talked yet. Do you want to? I know you had a.
Well, I don't want to start steering the conversation to skinks before it's before we're ready. So
Yeah, let's talk to skinks for a little bit. We can come back to all this later.
So talk to me about your ball python breeding. I'm going to bore everybody. Dave hates when we talk about pythons.
What was that?
Oh, he wants you to talk about ball python breeding a little bit. You don't have to if you don't want to.
No, I'm just busting Dave's balls because he hates it.
It's just, there's a lot
Everybody
of different out there, and I think there's a lot more difficult species to work with. And, it seems like anybody who tries ball pythons to be successful because there's a million different ways to do it. Don't get me wrong, I find it fascinating when you hear about a new way, but, then you started breeding ball pythons around what year?
1986.
Okay, and what was the first morph you introduced to your collection, and what year was that?
The first thing I got was, let's see. Well, the first thing I got was, I thought it was a pastel, but it ended up being a het leucistic.
Okay, so that was the first Russo?
Yes. Yeah, I got that from, Kevin McCurley as a bush baby. It was a wild-caught bush baby. And it was in a pile of, it was in a Rubbermaid bin filled with bush baby size snakes. And I said to Kevin, because I've known Kevin for a long time, this was like 98, I guess. I said to Kevin, where'd you get these? He was like, "Oh, they're just bush babies. I just picked them because they're all colorful. They're all pretty." And one was more yellow than the rest. And I called Greg Graziani and I told him, "I think I got a pastel," because he had just made a pastel that year. I said, "But mine's more yellow than orange." So, and then I bred, it was a female. I had to wait a while to raise it up. I bred it. You know what? I bred it in 98. So I guess I got it from Kevin in like 95 or 96. So long ago. 98, I made a clutch of them, and half of them came out like the mom, high yellow and black. ball python. So I was like to Greg Graziani, I said, I think I got some kind of pastel thing too. And then in 2000, I bred 2 of them to each other and made a leucistic. That was the first leucistic ever in this.
That's awesome.
I'm pretty sure. Prior to that, I think Kevin McCurley made a super, what he called Woma ball.
Mhm.
And it was a lethal gene. The super Woma was a like almost whitish snake, but they didn't live. It was like the jaguar carpet, the super jaguars. They're like all white, but they don't live.
Mm-hmm.
So I was a little concerned that, because I made a white snake and I was like, wow, is this thing going to live? But it was bulletproof. I mean, it hatched out and ate right away. It did great. That was in 2000. So I never really bought morphs because when I was doing it in the late 80s, there were no morphs. The only thing around was Bob Clark had an albino. And I had an albino too. My brother and I brought in a shipment of 10,000 balls, and the guy sent us an albino, and that was in 90 or 91, I forget. We sold it at one of the National Reptile Breeders Expos in Orlando to Kevin McCurley. And Bob Clark got mad at me. I think I sold it for a couple $100 less than he was selling his captive born ones. But I said to him, this is a wild caught snake. The thing could drop dead. Who knows?
Mhm.
Yeah.
But the reason why that was sold was my brother's idea. I would have kept it if I had known what I know now. But as far as buying morphs, there wasn't anything to buy. I think I saw one ghost come in and a bunch of other things maybe that were just brighter colored. I mean, who knows? So
Another gene that I remember, the ultramelanistic, you had got into that project because everyone at that point thought they were caramels, and you had bred it through some of your caramel stock and didn't produce any visuals, and then you made the Carmelo, I believe you called it.
Camarilla.
Camarilla, that's it. But who did your ultra come from?
I'll tell you how that started. Mark Bell, who was one of the founders of those caramels, was breeding caramels, and he had purchased a wild caught caramel and bred it to his caramels. No, I think he may have gotten his caramels from Ernie Wagner, who was a West Coast guy. It was way before me. He's a pioneer. And Mark had gotten probably a wild caught, thinking back now, it must have been a wild caught ultramel. Bred it to these caramels or het caramels, I forget which, and got all normals and was all upset. And it was mostly males, so he sold them all to Pete Call. And a friend of mine up here in New York ended up buying a bunch from Pete, and he had them at White Plains. They were males. He's like, Vin, I got these male het caramels. You want any? And I traded him some stuff for him, 2 of them. And another friend of mine wanted one, and I sold it to him, so I made money. And I kept the one male. Now, keep in mind, it was just a normal ball. And I bred it to a bunch of normals. And I knew my possibilities were 50%, that, half of those females were het caramels. Now, I keep using the word caramel because at this point I didn't know what an ultramel was. Nobody did. And raised those up and bred them back to the original male. And almost all of them turned out to be hets. And I think the first clutch I hatched had a caramel, an ultramel, and a Camarillo in it.
That could have been at all.
Hit that Camarillo. So I just got lucky out of 4 or 5 eggs. And I remember showing him to Kevin McCurley, and he was like, that's not a caramel. That's not a caramel.
Wow.
Like, that's a caramel. So then we figured out that then ultras started coming around. I forget who was breeding them at the time. It's a long time.
Was Kreider one of the other guys in that project?
Who?
Kreider? I think Kreider. I can't remember. I don't know if that was his first last name, because I remember there was a Kreider line of ultramelanistics early on, and I don't even think anybody really calls him that anymore.
Yeah. So, and that's just how that whole thing started. I'm not going to say it was dumb luck because it was a lot of work, to get it to that point. But now I've kept most, a lot of the ultra males, and I make ultras with them, and they all pop out those Camarillos every once in a while, and they're cool. But again, the caramels do have a gene defect. Your female caramels will lay eggs, but hardly any of them hatch, so it's like a waste. But the ultra males, on the other hand, are like bulletproof. They'll lay tons of eggs. I've got ultra males that lay 13, 14 eggs.
Wow.
Ooh, I'm sorry, Ryan. You go ahead, man. Throw some ball python questions. Do you really want to hear about how to breed ball pythons?
No, I don't. I was just joking around, but this is great.
No, this is good. Yeah, because I was really fortunate because, like I said, I started doing the White Plains show around 2002, and of course, your table was one that always stood out for me, and you had those on the table. What you started doing the blood boa albinos? I think you were the first one to do that cross, also.
Yeah, that was in. Trying to remember the year. It's so long ago. I did an albino to a blood in 2000 and probably 2007, I think, and I made double hets. By the time I bred them, it was probably 2011, I think, or 10, I forget. I have it written down somewhere. But anyway, I made the first, albino blood call albino. Now, Rich Eiley did the sharp albino to a sharp albino blood before that, a couple of years before that. And I saw that and I was like, you know what? I think I can make it redder with the call albino. And they are a little redder. They're not as, because the sharp albino is a burnt orange, But now I'm at the point where, the stuff that's popping out of those breedings are really, really red. Really red. So I've been breeding for red for a long time on that stuff. So
nice. So you in a story you told me years ago, and I think it might be in one of your books also, or maybe I read it in your book about the Russo red gene that you got through your brother's pet store one time. Somebody just walked in with that animal.
Yeah, some kid walked in with a pillowcase and was saying to my brother, do you guys take boas? I got to go away to college and I can't take it with me. And my brother's like, no, I don't even want it. I'm like, let me take a look. Guy opened the bag. I'm looking at this really red Colombian boa, beautiful snake. So I say to the guy, what do you want for it? It's like, I just want to give it a good home. I'm like, I'll take it. And that started the Russo red. I also added in, some really nice lime bred, original Rich Eiley salmon boas, and I also added some Coops pastel to it, and there's multiple ingredients in those snakes. So what we're seeing now are multiple generations of picking the best colored snakes and breeding them to each other, and some of them are really red. I mean, some of them are as red as blood boas.
Oh, I've always been extremely impressed with them, and I think that's one thing. There's a lot of things. I've always just been a boa guy, but I really do appreciate the time that goes into some of these pastel lines and the development of them. And that's another reason I really love working with skinks is, the line breeding, generation, mixing other things in there, and nothing really happens overnight, and nothing's going to be exactly what you want it to be. And occasionally you get surprised with something a little bit nicer. But the one thing I love about a lot of boa stories with like original mutations is, it seems like there's quite a few stories of just random boa mutations showing up at pet stores. I think it was Tracy Barker, the original VPIT positive. Yeah, came to the pet store, and I don't know if it's true or not. We're going to try to get her on one of the episodes in the future, but from what I heard originally, she refused the animals a couple times before she finally said, okay, I'll take them. And even with Rich Eiley and his salmon boa, same deal. And I'm not sure if that was proven or not to be what was it, Panamanian bloodline possibly on the original, but that was an animal.
I'm pretty sure his original ones were Panamanian.
Okay, and you guys probably don't know the story, so I'll tell you about it. Rich had this animal in his pet store, and it was an adult, and I believe it was a female from what I can remember, and he sold it to somebody, and they produced a litter of boas, I think on accident, and half just came out lacking red or black pigment, and they're extremely beautiful, really nice salmon colors. So he bought the whole litter, and then I think the following year they bred them again, and then finally he had bought the parents and the litter the second time around. And even Potter back in the day with the Aztec boa.
Mhm.
That was a boa that he had at a pet store, I think back in the 90s, sold to a teacher. Teacher retired, gave the animal back to him. When he got it back, he's like, this is a mutation of some kind, and then proved it out to be genetic with a super form X amount of years later. But no, I feel like there's quite a few boa stories are boa mutations that just were random. Even the IMG boa, I think that was something that Pete had
Peacock.
seen a kid walking around a show with. And every time he saw it, it was darker and darker. And eventually he was able to get it, and now we have the IMG boa. So it's very fascinating how random little boa morphs pop up, and you just find them in random places.
You know,
Especially
every trait traces back to the wild, pretty much. I mean, there's very few that were born in captivity. The exception is the VPIs, T positives. The Sterling boas. Those were born the same way. Two pet shop Colombian boas were just bred to each other and popped up 4 of those Sterling boas. So, what people don't realize is that genetic diversity is something that has been around forever. And I had a customer emailing me saying, Vin, I figured it out. All these things are crosses through hybridization. And, the Arabesque boa came about by crossing Colombians with Bolivians. And, the T positive albinos came about. He had all these theories. And I said, listen, I've been doing this my whole life. And I was around when those things popped up. They weren't crosses. You can't cross a Bolivian boa with a Colombian boa and make a new morph. You can't make something that's, het for Bolivian. You're going to make mutts if you cross them, So it's like people who understand genetics can appreciate, that this stuff does occur in the wild. It's whether or not you're going to harness it and procreate it and keep it going and go through the time to prove something out and make it, make it a new trait and name it and all this stuff. But most of them came from the wild. The first albinos came out of the wild. The Brian Sharp albino came out of the wild. The Pete Call albinos, Ernie Wagner had 5 of them in the 80s. They came in a shipment of wild-caught farm Colombian boas and ended up selling two of them to Pete Call and Paul Miles in 1990, whatever it was. So most of this stuff stems back to the wild. Look at all the ball python morphs. Everything. I was flabbergasted when the first pieds came out of the wild. How did that thing live in the wild?
Yeah, right.
It's crazy.
Same with the albinos.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Well, Pete even imported an adult leucistic ball python out of the wild one time, right? If I remember, I think it was an adult.
It was, from what I gather, it was a super yellow belly. So what do you call those? An ivory.
Ivory. Yeah.
Was he able to prove that out? Because I heard that animal never bred for him.
I don't know. But from seeing pictures of it, it was pretty much an ivory ball.
Yeah. And just kind of talk about a couple of the random boa morphs. Even Pete Call getting into the jungle boa, getting those from Sweden. I believe it was a zoo in Sweden that popped up at. And you're talking about the Sterling boa. I believe it was a gentleman, his name was Brandon, and he had a partner, it might have been his brother, down in North Carolina. They had produced a Sterling boa, I say, maybe around like 2005. Jeff Ronnie has the original female that produced that litter, and there's talk that it was actually a Partho litter, but he had produced 3 or 4 patternless animals. And again, I think it was 2005-ish, or maybe a little before that. And I think the mother was Peruvian, and he was never able to make it again. And he also had an issue with a thermostat malfunction. And I think he lost all the animals at one time. So it had patternless boas about 5 to 8 years earlier than Ken producing his.
Yeah.
You might have remembered that animal. I think he had a picture on his pool table, and I think he had the patternless boa on the pool balls racked up. But yeah, like I said, boas, and you're talking about like animals coming out of the wild. God knows how many subtle mutations had been missed in the wild with ball pythons before we started putting the time in. it's really mind-blowing how many mutations are coming out of the wild in ball pythons. Like, I just can't even wrap my mind around it genetically. Why?
It's amazing. I mean, in the 80s, I saw shipments of 10,000 ball pythons come in, 10,000 individual animals, and not one of them was different.
Yeah.
Why did it change in 2000s and 90s?
Recently, I know a lot of imports come out of Guyana, or at some points they heavily came out of Guyana, and I think the first pies did come out of Guyana. And then I think it was Albinos Unlimited had the Jester Ball at one point, and I don't think it proved out genetic, but it looked a lot like the Pinto Pied, and I'd heard those guys came from the same region or were collected from the same area. But now the ball python thing, it's hard to wrap your mind around, and with all the genetic diversity you have in them, like, you know, species come and go. You know, corn snakes were hot for a little while, and then they got replaced, and you know, boas kind of had a low for a little while when the Lacey Act was kicking in, and you know, a lot of people kind of got a little afraid they were gonna be limited to what they could do when they produced animal. So, you know, I feel like there was like a few people that kind of got out at that point and got back in when everything was fine. But I'll be honest, with the amount of ball python colors out there, I'm just not convinced that market in itself is ever going to go away, at least not in the next like 20 years. And now what we're doing with simple crosses, it seems almost endless.
Oh yeah, there's a huge demand for ball pythons. I mean, I breed a lot of ball pythons, and you know, I look at all the different varieties of snakes I breed as stocks. So, for example, you know, boas are Coca-Cola, ball pythons are, you know, AT&T. And what I'm hoping for, and it's worked in the past, is that if one stock is down, one is up, you know? So, for example, boas are hot now, and I'm making boas. So it's not like I wouldn't be making boas, but I'm always making boas. Ball pythons are hot, so I'll make more ball pythons. Pine snakes are hot now, so this year I was like, all right, I'm going to feed all my females to make pine snakes. You know, you've got to, you know, if you want to do this as a business, you have to be a businessman. You just can't get into something willy-nilly and say, I'm going to breed just ball pythons because they're hot right now. A lot of guys got burned doing that. And you know that. You know, people they took mortgages out on their houses to buy ball pythons. You know, look at the first coral glows, the bananas. They were what, $60,000?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
You know, I mean, but within 5 years they were down to $600. So
yeah,
you know, it's a dominant trade. It's sex-linked trade. It can be easily made, and you know, so you got to look at the different ways. The way I look at coral glows and bananas is that's $100 snake all day long. You know, I mean, wholesale wise, because I do a lot of wholesale. But why wouldn't I make as many of those as I can? Mm-hmm. Sell 20 of them, you're making a lot of money. 20 to one person, you know. So you've really got to look at it like it's a business and it's stocks, and you've got to pick what's you're good at. You know, like you were saying, Dave. It's like you try to tell people getting into it, pick something that you like and, you know, stick with it. But if you want to diversify, then have a few other things too. You'll have more stocks in your portfolio. But you gotta understand what fits into your microclimate, your environment. You know.
Mm-hmm. If I can jump back a little bit to the mutations of ball pythons too, when we were talking to Chris Cuppers, one of the things he was saying, and just, you know, what people were talking about with genetics, is that 8th generation you start to see mutations if you're breeding kind of the same bloodline, same stocks. And if you think like the 80s, early 80s, you start getting a whole bunch of ball pythons in about 2 years for each, you know, start each generation or so. It's like 16, 18 years. You're in the late 90s. All of a sudden, you're going to start seeing a high, you know, amount of mutations, you know, coming out. It kind of makes sense, that idea of kind of keeping the same bloodlines and this, you know, coming from the same stock. And obviously, you know, the further we get in, the more variety. I mean, when we first started, Ryan and I first started 9 years ago, you know, it was a cool thing to look on World of Ball Pythons and see all these crazy morphs and stuff. Now I can't. It's insane. There's so many different ones, and people name them all different sorts of stuff too. And you double name things and stuff like that. But there's so many now that you're like,
yeah.
What happened?
If somebody new gets into ball pythons today, they're in trouble. They got to do a lot of research, a lot of homework.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, like I said, I find the ball python market as a whole very interesting because, like you said, it's really had its ups and downs over the years, and it really reinvents itself. We talked about it in the past where, you saw guys like Ben Rennick doing like a 5, 6, 7 combo with Calico and Pinstripe and Spider and Lesser and Spot Nose. And then, people kind of got away from that for a little while, and now it's a very heavy recessive game. And how many can you put into a recessive? And now you're even seeing people, Justin, of course, breeding quad heads together and trying to do something. Again, when you have so much genetic diversity, you can really do anything you want. And like with the Russo gene, something like a yellow belly, yeah, it does make a white snake. But, when you start breeding that into the right combinations, you get these really beautiful high white flames up the side of the animal.
Yeah.
It's not even about making a white snake anymore. It's, how can you build on that part of that mutation?
Exactly.
So, yeah, like I said, this is really endless. And for new people coming in, it is overwhelming. And, a lot of people like to jump on the bandwagon and just do what's popular. But the reality is, with the amount of genes we have, you can take your business in any direction. And if marketed properly, you can make it popular. It doesn't really come down to the 2 or 3 or 4 big guys doing it first to be something special. You can really do this kind of stuff on your own if you just think about it a little bit.
We all started that way, every one of us.
Yeah.
I started with a collection of normal ball pythons, the stuff that I handpicked from shipments my brother and I were bringing in the 80s. To this day, I have a ball python. Well, I have a few ball pythons in my building that I've had since 1987. They're still breeding. They're still laying eggs.
Wow. You had posted a picture of a female. Was it consecutive years she's laid eggs for you, or she's been breeding for over 20 years in your collection, I believe?
She'll breed every year to every other year. So it just depends on how much I feed her. And sometimes I'll just give her a break and not bother. But, yeah, they'll go almost every year. They naturally will take a break sometimes. But those larger snakes, some of them lay 13, 14 eggs. It's like having little Burmese pythons.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, I always say going into the year, if I average 6 across the board, I'll be happy. Our average can be a little bit higher, but 6 is what I just expect every time.
6 is what it is. That's what, even me with a mature colony, 6 is your average. That's it. It's not going to change.
Yeah. You want to believe there could be more. I remember a picture that Amir posted years ago talking about the coral ball python. I think he had a normal female on over 20 eggs, in mid-20s. And it's funny because this is years ago when they were still worth a few dollars. And you look at this one clutch of eggs and he's like, yeah, I brought a coral glow to it. And some of the comments were, well, there goes that market. It's going to crash now. And it's all like, if one big clutch of ball pythons is going to crash a market, there's a bigger problem here right now.
Right.
Oh, man.
There's a theory, and it kind of makes sense. We were talking about where did all these genes pop up? How did they all come out of the wild in the 90s and 2000s? There's a theory that holds out because I knew people that were collecting the balls in Africa back then in the 80s, and what was happening is there was quotas for ball pythons back then. There still are, but the quotas are like hardly anything now because the demand is nothing compared to what it was in the 80s and 90s. But the quotas were, let's say, I think they were something like 100,000 per country, something to that effect.
Wow.
I remember my brother and I getting in 10,000. I remember, guys in Florida getting in 10,000. That's a lot of snakes. But what was happening is it got to the point where there was a greed factor, even in Africa, where they were collecting so many ball pythons that they filled the quotas and still had so many more left. So what did they do with them? They had to bring them back to the wild. They also had to bring back the gravid females that laid the eggs back to the wild. Now, whether they ended up in the fetish markets or went back to the wild, we don't know. But there was some proof that they went back to the wild. So what the theory is that these animals that had to be brought back to the wild, that were either females that were laid eggs or hatchlings that didn't fill the quota, they started scattering genes around in places that they weren't originally there already. Okay. So one of the theories is that from humans moving them around from cities to cities, towns to towns, fields to fields, whatever it was, they started spreading genes in places that they weren't existing in. And that's how 10 years later, they popped up as these, jungle balls, ghost balls, pied balls, pinstripes, spiders, whatever it was that was popping up. And they ended up, being sold into the U.S. markets as, high-end stuff. So,
Wow.
So that's actually a really good theory. I've had a lot of people put their 2 cents in that. That's probably one of the better answers I've ever heard on that. So that's kind of awesome. It's also like, the spider ball python, only one has ever been found in the wild, which
right.
down, you would think there'd be more. And even the pinstripe, I don't think there's ever been another pinstripe found in the wild since the first one.
No. But what people don't realize is there's something called spontaneous gene mutation. Okay. And a spontaneous gene mutation is when exactly what it sounds like. A spontaneous gene mutates from 2 normal parents that don't even carry a gene for it. And they produce this animal. And it most likely is like a spider or a pinstripe. It starts somewhere. You're assuming because it's dominant that it came from another spider. It most likely didn't. It most likely was a spontaneous gene mutation that occurred in the wild and was cryptic enough to survive without being eaten. And then fortunate enough to, well, maybe unfortunate enough to make it to the United States and be bred and, procreated. But that's my theory, knowing genetics, that a lot of this stuff is spontaneous gene mutation and just happens.
So breed your normals, guys. Breed your normals.
Hey, a lot of people have bred normals and made some cool stuff. I'm one of them.
Yeah, I mean, honestly, a normal ball python by itself is beautiful. You always get random different patterns, and no, they're not always genetic. But like I said, I've always liked ball pythons, just classics, wild type.
Yeah,
personally,
that's all I had in it when I started. They were all normals, but I picked each one out because they were a little different. I started that whole Congo ball thing with normals. I started the pumpkin ball with a normal.
Can you refresh me on the Congo? I don't know why I remember it, but I don't remember exactly how that one looked.
Congo, remember when people were calling things jungle balls?
Yeah.
They were like colorful, yellowy with black, wacky patterns, and they called them jungle balls. Well, I found in a shipment from this guy, Mike Ellard, Burgundy Reptile, the guy I was telling you about, he used to bring stuff to Ed's Aquarium. He had a shipment of ball pythons come in, and I was weeding through them, and they were in little plastic cups on a table in Orlando at the National Reptile Breeders Expo. And he just said something to me like, "Hey, Vin, you want to see something cool?" And it was like a jungle ball, a really nice orangey gold with a funky pattern. So I took it, and I paid him. I don't remember how much. It couldn't be more than $100. And eventually bred it, and it proved out to be dominant, meaning everything from it was just like it. It wasn't incomplete dominant because I never made a super form. But instead of calling it the jungle ball, I called it the Congo jungle ball, because the Congo jungle is the western extreme end of the ball python's natural range. So I just called it the Congo ball, And I've had those for years. I have them to this day. That some of the original females. I have the original female from Mike Ellard that I got probably in 1990. And that snake holds the record for most eggs in one clutch, 15 in my collection.
Wow.
Yeah.
So you said it's dominant and every baby carries the trait?
Well, every baby from that female does. But when I bred those babies from that female, they made half of their babies Congos. And what people don't realize is that when you breed that original dominant Congo to a normal, all those babies are Congo, but they're het for normal. One of their parents was normal.
Yeah.
That's an interesting way to think about it.
Yeah.
It's an interesting one.
Simple way of putting it, because when I started breeding those Congo babies back to other normals, I was only getting half Congos. I wasn't getting all Congos. And then I realized, well, one of the parents was normal back in the family tree, and the first time I bred them.
Super cool.
Yeah. Have you, I mean, like I said, you work with a lot of different species. Have you ever had anything just randomly pop up in your collection over the years that proved out to be genetic outside of, buying them, thinking they could be something?
I'm sure something has in the past. Nothing that, well, I popped up in my Tamaulipas cloud forest boas. I popped up what looks like the Inca trait. Those I'm raising up. If they do prove out, I'm going to call them. I'll probably call them Aztec boa, not Aztec. They look like the Aztec or Inca boa. I'm going to call them Apache boa, probably.
Pretty cool.
Yeah.
How many years ago did that pop up for you?
Like 3 or 4 years ago. So they should be almost ready to go in another year or so. I'm not going to breed them to each other, because if it does work like that, Aztec or Inca trait, from what I gather, it's a lethal gene. So
the Inca, I'm not 100% sure on. I think someone recently posted a litter where they had said they could have possible Incas, and it was a little more busy pattern. Almost looked like there might have been motley, and there might have been motley in the pairing. I didn't pay a ton of attention. I just saved a couple pictures. But the one thing that sucks, like what you're saying, there's not many super forms in boa constrictors that are viable.
Right.
Most of them just don't make it. And, Jeff this year bred the super crystal male and proves him out. And he seems extremely viable, which is really nice. And, I guess arguably the super Key West seem to be doing good. I know there was some bad luck with the super Roswells early on, but I'm not sure if that was based on the breeder working with them, because I feel like I'm seeing more supers hitting adulthood now than ever before. But yeah, most supers and boas, all lethal, which is unfortunate.
Yeah, the jungles, the motleys, they're all done.
The Princess Diamond, or what do they call it? The Diamond now, but
yeah. So your opinion on the Princess Diamond, because I think that's was it Brazilian bloodline for the original?
yeah, well, that's where it was.
Yeah. So when he started making them, it kind of looked like breeding a Brazilian to a Colombian, and you would kind of
they had little peaks,
Yeah. And then it was all hets originally, and then he realized you can actually isolate it and you can see pick them out, so it's no longer a het, it's a
it's incomplete dominant. They look like hypos.
Yeah. No, yeah, that one. I guess you could say that super forms just fine. And with Jeff's crystal bow, which is a super labyrinth, which is like the crystal ball python. It's like leucistic with pattern.
Yeah.
No, I like that project a lot. I love the labyrinth. It's like a jungle on steroids when it comes to the pattern. Like, I've always really obsessed on that one since it came out.
Are you working with the Scoria boa?
No, that's another lethal gene.
Is it?
Well, they have a funky, they have, we'll call it like a spider ball or a jaguar carpet. They've got the same issues. So I don't work with anything that's got issues like that. To me, that's, you're just procreating a defect. So not knocking the snake, they're beautiful, but I don't make super motleys. I don't make super jungles. I don't make scorias. I don't do any of that stuff. But to me, and with the knowledge I have in genetics, a lot of the stuff I get, I try to make F1, F2, F3, F4, F5, like the Russo Reds. They're up to like F5. You're not going to do that with a scoria boa. It's just not going to happen. You're not going to do that with a motley. You're not going to do that with the jungle. So in order for me to keep popping up the traits that I want, I need to line breed, down the line. And with certain traits, you can't. So it's just, again, it's my opinion. I'm not going to bother with lethal genes. It's just not, to me, it's not economically feasible. So
Just to clarify, because I'm not very well versed in boas, and I don't know if the people that are listening are
they should be.
experts, but if you're doing
There's a book for it. They could buy a book and be experts really quick.
there's a new book, the other one sold out. I can't get it unless I spend $1,000 on eBay.
Well, the new one's even better. So just get the new one for $60.
Yeah.
But the scoria itself is fine, or is that wonky, or is it just scoria to scoria you have?
Well, the scoria is wonky, so I can only imagine if you just scoria to scoria that it's maybe just get worse. I don't know. Again, I'm not going to procreate something that I feel is for example, I'll give you a perfect example. In England, you're not allowed to sell spider balls. You're not allowed to sell jaguar carpet pythons because they feel that it's inhumane to procreate an animal with a genetic defect. Now, do I agree with them? No, I'm an American. I'm a patriot. I feel like I can do whatever I want. But as far as, the health of the animals and a second example, the spider ball. I don't have to tell you about the spider ball. You already know about it.
Mm-hmm.
Here's the perfect example. I have wholesalers that buy ball pythons from me. They won't buy anything with spider in it because if it ends up in the stores that they sell things to, and the customer complains that my ball python has stargazer's disease or IBD,
Mm-hmm.
I don't want to have to deal with the customers in explaining what's going on, so they want nothing with spider in it. So it's just my opinion that maybe 20 years from now, 30 years from now, the wholesalers aren't going to want anything with scoria in it. It might be like, how are we going to sell a snake whose head's wobbling around all the time? Again, it's my opinion. I don't want anybody bashing me saying that you bashed the scoria boa. I didn't. I love them. They're beautiful snakes.
They're definitely beautiful. But you brought up the magic word here. Nobody wants to talk about IBD. I don't know. I would love to dive into that a little bit because a lot of people won't even touch a boa because there's all kind of rumors that go around. Like if there's anybody that probably could clear it up, maybe it's you, about the dangers or what dangers there are or aren't in that. So,
well, one of the things that I do as a commercial breeder is I keep a closed facility. I really don't take boas in from other people. Dave, you asked me, what boas do I not have? I'm at the point where I don't need anything. I don't want to take anything into my building or my space anymore. Am I paranoid? No. I just believe that bringing in foreign pathogens, there's a lot of guys out there that want to get into snakes, specifically boas, and they'll make one big mistake. They'll spend a lot of money on a lot of boas from a lot of different people. And to me, that's just creating a soup or a stew of pathogen and bacteria and disease. So being the breeder that I am, and like I said to you before, I've got snakes I've had in my collection over 30 years. I've got boas I've had in my collection over 20, 25 years. I believe that by keeping my animals secluded to just them is the secret. Mites are a giant issue as far as spreading these pathogens and these diseases and these bacteria. Keeping your building mite-free is the number one reason why I keep it a closed facility. I can't bring animals into my building and risk spreading mites through my collection and losing the whole thing. It's my livelihood. This is what I do. So people offer me snakes all the time for free. I'm the president of the local Herp Society, and people are like, Vin, we got a boa coming. You want it? I'm like, no, I don't want it. Give it to some kid who's, but it's a really nice looking boa. You'll like it. I couldn't care if it was, a real special boa. I'm at the point now where I'm not doing it anymore. So I think the number one cause of the spread of these diseases and pathogens, viruses, bacteria is overcrowding and too many snakes from too many different places. So, you know, I have plenty of customers that buy stuff from me, and you know, they'll say, "Vin, I bought this snake from so and so or Joe Nobody, and I put them all in the same room, and now I put these two together, and they're doing weird things." I'm like, "Well, I don't know what to tell you. If you want snakes from a reputable breeder, buy them from a reputable place and keep them with each other." You know.
Yeah.
That's my only theory. I truly believe, and I've written about this in my book, I truly believe that these inclusion bodies, this IBD, inclusion body disorder, I truly believe that inclusion bodies are present in every boa. I also truly believe that certain stresses and certain conditions will bring about the cause of those inclusion bodies to take over that snake. So again, if you keep your boas healthy, happy, thermoregulate. With thermoregulating, they can go from their hot spot to their cool spot. Don't introduce a lot of snakes from different places, and also don't introduce snakes from different races. You know, wild caught snakes. Don't bring wild caught snakes into your facility at all, ever. I mean, to me, that's like the biggest sin, you know. Keep everything separate. If you're going to be doing wild caught stuff, keep it in a completely different building or a different room. You need to treat it like it's a laboratory. You know, my wife works in a cancer research laboratory. They worry about, you know, foreign bacteria and pathogens constantly. So it's something you need to be cognizant of. Yeah, this is a hobby and this is for fun too, but cleanliness is important. It really is. That's why this became full time for me. Working a full time job and doing this didn't work for me. I couldn't do it the way I wanted to, you know. So maybe that'll clear things up for you. I don't know. But as far as getting into the science of it, I think it's a lot simpler than people think. I don't think it, you know, you hear about, for example, in Europe, there's some test that people test their boas, and, you know, I don't get it. It's like, get your snakes from somebody that's got a good, clean facility, and the snakes look good and act right, and that's what you do, you know?
Yeah, I know there's been some boa breeders over the year that have made the joke that every boa, however it dies, if you had it tested, you know, you could blame it on IBD. It's going to come up as a positive. And, you know, people are making the same comments right now with the COVID stuff. You know, people are getting tested no matter how they passed away. And if they're getting tested positive for COVID, I know they're using that as the reason of death sometimes.
Right.
Supposedly, this could be a conspiracy theory. We don't know this for sure. But no, like you said, cleanliness is everything, and you know, just being safe. You know, a good deal is not always a good deal. There's certain reasons why certain animals are sold cheaper. A free animal can come with problems, same as you.
Yeah.
Someone offers me a free animal, it's like, you know, I do appreciate the gesture, but I'm scared shitless to bring it to my building.
Right.
So, you know, I don't blame you at all on any of that. And I think, gosh, you know, when people get into this hobby, you know, we get entranced by the colors and just everything about it. And a lot of us don't think about the disease end of things. And until someone has to experience it firsthand, they never really take it serious.
Right.
So, you know, you learn the hard way, I hate to say it, in this hobby sometimes. And, you know, just like when people have mites, it's like, here's the deal. There's never been a breeder in this industry that has not dealt with mites at least once in their life. It's just part of the hobby. But what did you do about it when you had a problem? So, you know, things are going to happen. It's just, you know, what's the next step? Are you going to do something about it? Or are you going to let it just go through everything and kill your animals? But no, yeah, I wouldn't be surprised if everything, especially, you know, you consider we're keeping these animals in smaller cages. You know, you can only give them so much space if you're going to want to have multiple animals. It's just kind of part of it. And keep the environment clean, keep the water fresh, and you shouldn't ever have any issues like Vin's saying. But, like I said, you never know. Disease is something that nobody wants to talk about. It's
Right.
such a scary subject. And, even having a real conversation about it is almost like admitting defeat or admitting you've had an issue at some point. So, yeah, not many people want to talk about this kind of stuff.
And, again, I wrote a chapter about it in my book, and I went into some detail about the science about it. But I think it's more important to put the emphasis on the, cleanliness of your facility, the closed facility concept, also not bringing so many foreign substances into one room. And again, I learned about this from when I was wholesaling when I was a kid. I mean, my brother and I were bringing in stuff from all these different countries, and we saw some crazy stuff and some wacky diseases that came through there. I noticed right away that's not the wave of the future. The wave of the future is the laboratory-like environment. Again, my place isn't sterile. It's just a clean, normal facility, but it's not. I've been to so many facilities where the place is a friggin' mess. I've had people invite me to see their facilities in other states, and I walk in and it's like, you knew I was coming. The place there's shit everywhere. You've known for weeks that I was coming by. And you could basically walk into my place at any time, and it's generally clean, because I'm there all the time and I'm cleaning it. I'm not bragging saying mine's the cleanest facility. It's not. But to me, that's one of the most important parts of keeping a bacteria pathogen-free environment.
Mm-hmm.
Why? You're up against so many other, problems. Why amplify them?
Yeah,
Oh, for sure.
So do you think we can switch gears to I think what Ryan was going to try to get to, skinks?
No.
Skinks. Can't talk about that.
Yeah, we're going to have to lighten it up a little bit after that. We're going to have a little fun now. So you want to talk about some skinks? When did you start breeding? Because Northerns, and I think Ryan told me he saw you bred Tannenbars.
Yeah, I have Northerns, I have Tannenbars, I have Westerns, I have
Westerns, nice.
Yeah, I have Irian Jayas, which I really like. I have like the reddish looking ones. I've been picking all the red ones.
I've been seeing you posting on your Instagram locks between those, and some of them you're having some success actually producing captive born, right?
Irian Jaya?
Yeah.
Oh yeah. The Irian Jayas I have, I've had them since 1991, I think, or two, when they were coming out of the wild on a pretty regular basis.
I'd love to hear your technique in breeding those, because we speak with a lot of people that are trying to do it and they're having terrible success.
Well, the problem you got to keep in mind, there's a bunch of different. You have Maruki.
Mm-hmm.
You have the Gigas, which are the Halmahera.
Yeah.
And you have the I guess, is it Evanescence, the Irian Jaya?
Yeah.
Those three breed very differently from each other. For me, the Irian Jayas are breed more like the northern blue tongue skinks. They go through the basic recipe of their cooling period is 70 degrees, not 55, 60 like a northern. Okay, so all I do is turn their heat off, the Irian Jayas, and leave them in the main warehouse. So they have no supplemental heat all winter. They just sit there, and I don't feed them.
And are you jacking the humidity up on them or no?
No, I don't do anything with humidity on them.
Huh.
Like I said, they breed more like the northern blue tongues for me. But you got to keep in mind, mine have been multiple generations since the 90s in captivity. So
they may have adjusted a bit from.
Yeah, you have to keep this in mind. A lot of those wild caught animals that were coming out of Indonesia are living in a flip-flopped environment You know, they're southern hemisphere, we're northern hemisphere. So you're taking a snake that was in the middle of its summer and you're bringing it into your winter. You know what I mean by that?
Mm-hmm.
It takes many years for those wild-caught animals to change that internal clock. Some of them don't change. I had the most difficult time with those Irian Jayas in the beginning, getting them to breed. The only reason why I did it is there was a guy named Weiss Reptiles. You guys remember him? You guys haven't been around that long. This guy Weiss, he was breeding skinks a long time ago, probably in the 80s. And he bought a bunch of the Irian Jayas from me and my brother. We brought in a shipment of them. And years later, he's like, "Vin, I've been breeding these things. You want any?" I'm like, "Yeah, I do. As a matter of fact, I want a bunch of them." So I got some back from him. And it's those original animals that started my whole, group that I have now. So they're multiple generations. But getting back to what people are having issues with, the Marukis and the Halmaheras, those animals, I don't breed those anymore. I used to. And the reason why I don't is because they don't go by that same recipe as my Northerns and my Irian Jayas and my Westerns and my Tannenbars. They breed in the fall. And you've got to keep them warm all winter, which to me is a total waste. I can't have one race of animal that's similar to the rest that needs all this special care with special different environments and special different caging and everything. So those animals, I'm sure you've heard, most of the people breed those in like November and December, which to me is insane. And it's all based on creating a dry season and a wet season, just like I was talking about earlier with other snakes and other reptiles. So those I don't breed anymore. And the other reason why I don't breed them anymore is because they're still coming out of the wild.
Mm-hmm.
To me, it creates less of a demand for them. A demand from me, from my captive bred animals, because then I'm at a show saying, "Why don't you buy my Maruki blue tongues for $350 a piece?" When the guy right next to me's got the ones that he got from, the wholesaler, and they're $150. Yeah. Mm-hmm. So that's why I don't do those anymore. But the Irian Jayas I really like, and they're pretty easy to breed.
Wow.
So, you're talking seasons, with Northerns especially, I've noticed the past, probably 5 years, it feels like the season for a lot of people have been starting a lot earlier. I'm a creature of habit.
I don't get that. All these guys in Florida, they show pictures of them breeding in January. I think they're just impatient.
I mean, people in your guys' region are starting to breed in November and December on their Northerns now.
Why are they cooling them down? It's like, I come from the school of seasonality. My building is cold in the winter and warm in the summer. I can't flip-flop it, Mm-hmm. Same with my boas. My boas give birth July through September. That's it. That's not going to change ever, Mm-hmm. Ever. I got people emailing me now saying, "Vin, what do you have available?" I'm like, nothing. Nothing's born yet. It's only May. You got to wait.
So how many Westerns do you have?
An undisclosed amount.
Yeah, enough.
Oh.
You got just enough Westerns.
You have the mystery there. Yeah, all right.
Yeah, I didn't know you had.
Have you had success producing Westerns yet?
Not yet, but I'm hoping this year I will.
Okay. And I'm hoping you email us and let us know when they're available.
I only have 5 or 6 babies, so it's not like I'll be like, "How many you want?"
Yeah.
What he's saying is he's not going to call you, buddy.
Probably.
It's okay, though. He's not going to call me either, and I want him to.
I don't count my skinks before they're even born. So
Trust me, us too either.
Yeah, so we'll see what happens. But they remind me of boas. Mine needed 4 or 5 years. So
wow.
I tried when they were younger. They were big enough. I mean, they grow super fast. I mean, they were full size skinks at 6 months old.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah.
They were like a northern or an eastern. I mean, they grew fast, and I heard stories of people breeding them at a year and a half too, but they didn't do it for me. This was the first year they bred, and they are 4.
Yeah.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
I mean, age really is everything. And, it's funny because, you have the ball python community, like you say, and everything can be rushed. It's proven that it's a species you can get your male to breeding size in 6 months without any issues. The trend too, again, talking about skinks, because, there wasn't really, as the skink market really just kind of came into its own over the last 6 years. It's almost not non-existent, but, you had your clicks here and here that were working with them, but they weren't really mainstream, I guess you could say. And, talking about them, like there's a lot of people based on what happens in Australia where people are breeding their northerns at 6-7 months old without even ever putting them into the cool down. They're just getting to that size and they're breeding them, but they are being successful. So I am like you. I am never really in a rush. Even if it's something special, there's always so much going on in the collection. I don't ever get fixated on that one animal that it has to get there faster than every other animal we have.
Right.
Early on in anything, you kind of want to get it a little faster. So, you can't fault people for doing what, the Australians do, because, a lot of what we know about that species is based on them. But God, man, I will say there was one year we did raise them up fast and we did breed them at under a year old, and I hated it. Everything about that year, I wasn't happy with the litters. I wish we never even did it. We had a lot of babies that didn't make it. So, we live and we learn. We did the whole let's do it real fast, and honestly, we'll never do it again. I'm all about that 2.5 to 3.5 mark on female northerns. I think is perfect.
That's the number, I mean, and it's funny you said that, you got plenty of other things going on, and it's the same thing with me. It's like, I can't concentrate all my effort into, I'm going to feed these Westerns to the point they're going to blow up, and then I'm going to put them together at 9 months old and hope they breed, and by the time they're a year old, I'll have babies again. I have so many other things going on that I just feed them seasonally with everything else. And then I look at them when they're 4 years old or 3 years old and be like, all right, they're ready to go now. It's like everything's on autopilot in the building because everything's in a section where they're all being maintained the same way, But it's like you open a drawer one day and you're like, ready to go, Put that one in the ready section. That's it. It's the same with the boas,
And I bet the people, like, even though they are sexually viable at such a young age, like they're still like building their own bodies at that point and like trying to mature themselves. So taxing their system like that so early on, I'm sure that has a really negative effect.
I've sold skinks to people that did the I'm going to feed them and breed them young thing, and they'll show me their skinks at 3 or 4 years old, and they're half the size of my 15-year-old breeders that are making 15, 16 babies a year consistently, And
I bet you that's why there's so many kinking issues and stuff like that, because you're depleting the calcium supply of these animals at a young age while they're developing.
And they're not feeding them properly too, They're not feeding them the right foods. I mean, I have a basic recipe that I've been using for 30 years on skinks, and I won't change it. All of that, what was it? Some kind of skink grub came out where it's like it's a powder and you cook it and add water. Yeah. It sounds like a great idea, but from the skinks that I saw that were babies on that stuff, they didn't look right. They looked like they had a lot of water weight in them, So I never got into it. I just do simple cat food and reptile bearded dragon pellets, and I also use that crested gecko diet too that I use as powder to mix in with everything. It makes it like fruity smelling, and they love that. And I'll add
fresh vegetables with them.
Yeah, I'm adding chopped up mixed vegetables, and that's it. It's done. And calcium if they're pregnant, and no calcium if they're not. So.
And do you keep them on UVB or no?
No, not at all. The Westerns are, though. The Westerns I treat like monitors.
Okay.
The Westerns don't eat plate food. They prefer bugs and little mice. Once in a while, they'll eat, I would say once a week, they might eat, once every 2 weeks, they might eat cat food with a little bit of, if you got to make it look like it has bugs in it.
Okay.
And they'll eat it. But they eat predominantly dubia and pinkies and some reptile bearded dragon pellets on their own, and some I mean, very few. Some cat food if it looks like it's got bugs mixed in it. So,
So you personally, are you leaving the dry repcal diet in there at all times so the munch on if they want?
it's not dry. I wet it and put it in there as like the little puffed up fruit, Fruit Loops.
Okay.
And they eat it right away. If they don't eat it, it dries up, and I take it out.
So, Brian, I see you're thinking a lot over there, and I say this to a lot of people. You guys are having a really great year this year. Don't fucking change anything because that works for Vin.
Yeah,
if something works for Vin, it doesn't mean it's going to work for you. I've made that mistake with a lot of species over the years, and skink diet is one of the more serious conversations worth having. We've ventured off from what we've done in the past because we thought there was an easier way to do it based on other breeders in the industry. And we've had really bad years because of it. Going back to the roots, and a lot of my diet was designed based on Jeff Sr. from JMG when he worked with skinks and what he was using, and changing it up and putting a couple of new things in over the years. But honestly, if it ain't broken, don't fix it, buddy. Like I said, leave it alone.
I'm super happy with the way our season is going this year, but I am interested to hear other people's ideas. But one thing I did notice, and that I'm really glad we changed this year, is putting them on UVB, because I don't know if it really affected their health that much, but the psychology of the animal, like they behave totally different on UVB and off UVB. So I don't know. Well,
now talking about that, because what rack system did you have them in before you switched them? Was it a fully enclosed CB70 where they couldn't really see their environment around them or any movement?
We had them in. We first started off in regular CB70s, fully enclosed, but then we went to the ARS ones with the windows, which they loved those. They were always up at the front of the, looking out, seeing what's going on in the room and everything. So we were really happy when we made that change. But then, skinks that were almost lethargic, or they just laid about or whatever, I put them in a rack system with UVB basking, and all of a sudden they're running around like maniacs, like really active. And I'm like, wow, that's a totally different animal than last year. So I don't know if that's good or bad or whatever. I mean, I don't know what's going on in their brains, but
yeah, and they're still on rack.
They're under there all the time,
Yeah, we actually built the rack. So it's still a rack system. It's like the cement tubs, and you probably have seen pictures, but we built it so that there's a gap now between each tub.
You put a light?
Yeah, with a light over it.
Yeah. It's a good idea.
Yeah, Bill Brand has this entire collection of skinks built that way, and TC had gone about it that way also, and added a lot of extra bells and whistles to the setup, which I think is great. Like I said, it's a free show in this hobby. There's a lot of things like he's talking about with boas where I'm doing things differently, but I am being successful with them. So,
right.
it's find something that works for you and try not to go off on the original plan. We had, like I said, 1 year we had changed our diet, and it might have been as high as 30% of the babies we produced that year were born with kinks and deficiencies. And this year we're up to about 90 babies so far. And we've only had one born with a kink. So
that's really good.
Yeah, it's awesome. But again, it was just going back to what originally worked and not constantly trying to improve on a process that was perfect in the first place.
Yeah.
So, I do find this interesting, and I do kind of want to maybe do some of the stuff he's saying, but I'm scared shitless to change anything at this point, because every time I make a change, I feel like we fail or take a step back.
It could be a disaster, and that's what you risk. You risk losing a whole season or even 2 seasons, depending on how drastic the change was.
Well, your animals are in your environment too, and they're used to your regimen and your feeding regimen and what you're feeding them. So they're used to a certain intake also. So to change that up midstream is foolish. I mean, it would be insane. The only way to do it would, if you wanted to try something, would be to raise up a different group of animals from babies on a different diet.
That's true.
And then go with them and then use them as the experiment, and if it doesn't work out, then put them onto your diet, So, the diet I have for myself, I've been using for, like I said, almost 30 years, and it works for me fine. It's just simple and easy, and every single skink guy I know has a different diet. Everyone.
It has been different. Everybody we've talked to, it's been quite a few.
The only thing that all of my skink friends have taken off of me is the Rep Cow Bearded Dragon pellets. All of them have adopted that.
That's what I was finding interesting.
Add into your feeding regimen. You soak them in water and you throw them in and you mix them in a bowl and you give it to them. You're not going to mess them up, So one of my friends buys the biggest bag you can get. I think it's like a 50-pound you can get of that stuff.
Yeah. I think the Australians, I think Peter Birch and I know Joe Ball over the years, I think they've used that same diet. And they also like the grub pie from Rapashi. I've heard a lot of really good things about. But again,
I sold a skink to a guy many years ago, and he was telling me that he had bearded dragons, so he had the bearded dragon pellets. He said all he fed his skink was bearded dragon pellets. This is years ago. And he showed me the skink when it was like 5 years old, and it was immaculate. Yeah. I'm like, wow, this thing is beautiful. What do you feed it? Oh, I'll only feed it bearded dragon. And he was giving it to him dry. He wasn't even wetting them down.
Wow.
Feed it like a cat, Like leaving them a little bowl of dry food all the time.
Yeah, I mean, the Australians are doing the same thing. There's they do it with cat food a lot, and they'll always have dry cat food, and they're always
I tried that. They'll nibble at it, but they don't eat it like the wet food, Yeah.
They didn't fall in love with it. And living in New York, one thing that I really miss about it was Wegmans. I'm sure you have some Wegmans out by you, and they have
I know what it was, yeah.
They had their line of dog food and cat food, and they had an organic, and they also had the grain-free option and all this other stuff. And I used to love their stuff. 0 recalls. The animals did great on them. I feel like in the beginning, I didn't worry whether or not it was grain-free, and then somewhere along the line, someone put it in my head that we couldn't or shouldn't do grain-free. But I don't know. Like I said, these guys are pretty bulletproof. It takes a lot to really mess with them, but the kinking in the tail and things that you get during development, a lot of times I think, goes into what goes into mom. And, talking about just tragedy, there was a year where we had been playing around with a test diet, and everything that we fed that test diet to came out deformed or dead. And it was unfortunate because there were some very unique animals we produced that year. And one of them, thank God, is still kicking, but it doesn't look right. The underbite is horrible, metabolic bone disease right from the start, but it's alive and it's well. We're just never convinced it's ever going to breed. And there were actually a couple other animals that year that we produced on that test diet that we did get to adulthood and we did breed. And this is going to sound really awful, but the animals practically melted during the whole gestation period. So, dieting scares the shit out of me. When people recommend doing things a little different, I just don't want to do it anymore.
Well, I'm going to give you one little tidbit about skinks that I learned in the 30 years. And skinks to me are a lot like colubrids in that the food you give them after they give birth is the most important part of what they'll need nutrient-wise for the next summer. So a lot of people don't realize that when that skink gives birth to her 10, 15, whatever babies, she's deflated. There's not much left of her. You need to feed her the best quality food at that time, which for me is July and August and September. You need to feed her the best food you could possibly get into her, because when she hibernates or brumates, she's obviously not eating anything. When she wakes up from hibernation, she's not eating anything right away. They're usually breeding before they're in their full feeding mode, for me at least. Mm-hmm. So she's most likely pregnant before she's even started feeding regularly. So all of the food that you gave her the summer before is what's feeding those babies that are in her stomach that summer. You know what I mean?
That's understandable.
So
we just don't vary. We have a diet. We love our diet. We feed it year round. The babies get raised upon it. We just try to keep it the same. No added supplements. We do add calcium year round. And you saying you do it more while they're gravid.
Gravid females, yeah.
Yeah, which understandable in anything. Extra calcium in that time is important.
Or young ones raising up,
Yeah.
I mix it in whenever I feel like I need it. I'm like, all right, I think they need it this week. You know, when they give birth, I give it to them right after they give birth. You know.
Yeah, like I said, and I will say, you know, with this species, you know, we were talking to Chris. Chris Cupper is an Australian breeder. In case you didn't know, Vin, I'm sure you didn't know about him. No offense to Chris, but you know, he's taking body weights. Like he's feeding them. I think he's even measuring out the size of the meal. He's checking the female's weights every single week. Like he's really technical about it, which is awesome. But you know, what the heck is it? I find that this species does its best when it's a little leaner. Obesity is never good in any reptile, in my opinion. And I think obesity is one of the issues why savanna monitors don't breed very well in captivity.
Really?
We're in the wrong diet. And again, skinks, you know, there are some that go into the breeding year, come out of cool, and you're like, oh man, you know, maybe you're just a little underweight. And those are the ones that tend to go every year. And the ones that are perfect looking and plump are the ones that tend to go off and on every couple of years.
And the closer you are to the wild caught bloodline, the truer that is. You know, a lot of the northerns are way out of the wild bloodline now because they're multiple, you know, generations out of the wild. But my Irian Giants and my Tannenbars, they won't breed if they're fat at all. They don't do anything. They'll breed, but they won't have babies. It's those leaner, meaner animals that breed and then get plump and give birth to, you know, 7, 8 babies. They don't have giant. They're not like the northerns. The northerns are like cats. I mean, they just keep having babies. But they're the same way. It's like if you overfeed them, you're done. And I'm sure Irian Giant, well, the Marukis and the Halmaheras and all that stuff are the same way. It's like, again, people overfeed their stuff. These skinks have a very specific feeding season and a non-feeding season, you know, because like, think about it. The month before they give birth, they don't eat anything. There's no room. They're not eating, you know.
I think that's one of the problems with your average, you know, any reptile breeder these days. They totally disregard the seasonality of food. And like, even when we're talking about our own pets, like, you know, you look at the standard American dog is like completely obese and overweight. And you're like, oh, well, I can see its ribs. It's got to be, you know, let me call animal control on you because you're abusing your dog. You're like, no, it's supposed to look that way, idiot. You know what I mean?
Hey, here's the perfect example. There's a local university here that I'm on the board with that has an animal facility. And their animal facility is predominantly mammals. It's mice, rats, some sheep, you know, it's a research facility. And there's one herpetologist in there who's got a boa facility. And a couple of years ago, they got the boa facility got written up for thin snakes from the Laboratory Animal Association of, you know, whatever they are. They're just one of the powers that be that inspect the laboratories for animal care. And they called me in as an expert to give my opinion. And the first thing I wanted to look at was the guy's feeding charts, you know. And the weird thing is I didn't know who he was until I met him at the hearing. They had like a hearing, you know.
Wow.
But what happened was he was feeding his snakes pretty regularly. I mean, for boas, it was more than I would feed them. And I breed them. Were the snakes thin? Some were a little thin, but not like something you wouldn't see come out of the wild, you know. They were healthy. They were fine to me. So I started getting the temperatures in the building to see what the story with that was. And it turned out that right next door to this snake facility was the boiler room for the whole building. So this snake room in the animal facility was 86 degrees all the time.
Wow.
Now the snakes had hot spots too of like 90, but they were at 86 degrees all year round for years. This guy had some of those snakes 3, 4, 5 years.
So they were burning calories.
Yeah, they're just burning through food. And so at the hearing, the guy shows up, and it turns out it's a guy I knew. like through the academics that I know. And I basically told this board of people, the room's way too hot and these snakes are burning calories faster than you can feed them to them. And they look healthy to me. I'm sure the vet on the premises feels the same way. And they didn't write him up and give him, reprimands or whatever. And he was fine. Everything was fine. But what it turns out to be is like, everybody has the mentality of you have to feed something constantly. They have, like, I call it the Italian grandmother syndrome. You got to eat. If it's not eating regularly, it's dying. And I see it as the same thing in a professional animal facility. They're thinking you have to feed these snakes every Friday at 6 o'clock. It's crazy. It doesn't happen that way in the wild. So, and skinks are the same way. Going back to them, they have a very specific seasonality where they come from, regardless of where they come from. Northern Australia, Southern Australia, Irian Jaya, it doesn't matter. There's going to be a seasonality where there's an abundance of food for 8 weeks, and then there's probably no food for 3 months and no rain for 3 months. So you need to create that, cycle.
Yeah, I may be wrong, and because I don't know everything, obviously, but hey, knock it off, Ben. I saw that. But I think we just overfeed in general in the hobby. Like, we think we get good longevity out of these animals. They're breeding, everything seems to be working right. But like, if we kind of calmed it down and fed half as much, we probably would, see these animals breeding and being, viable. Like, a considerable percentage more. Don't believe Ryan. Look at this.
Those words came out of Ben. You better watch yourself, buddy.
Ben's been ornery lately. It's fine.
Look what you make him do. He's hanging out at his grandma's house all day instead of you guys doing a little team in the basement. Like, this isn't working for him, man. He's lonely. He's going to take it out on you.
He's planning a wedding, so he's under a lot of stress. You know what I mean? So I forgive you. It's fine. You've been doing this for 10 years and you still don't even know what you have in our collection, but that's fine.
Yeah, fine. Sure.
All good.
But well, okay. So, gosh, who has got something?
I got something. You have a lot of really odd and weird stuff in your collection, man. Like, I'm scrolling through your Instagram and you just have these one-off things that are like really cool. Like, what is your favorite little pet project you have going on right now?
Probably the Viper boas.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that little male in that picture. Good for him. Good for him.
I'm up to like three generations with those. So
that's awesome. I don't think there's that many people. I wouldn't think there's that many people in the United States that really even work with those. You see them come in every once in a while, but not a big pool of breeders.
Nobody's breeding them. I don't think anybody's bred 2 or 3 generations, that's for sure. I mean, some people have had some beginner's luck and had a wild-caught female breed for them, which is not hard to do. At least that it was easy for me. But the challenge for me was, all right, I bred some wild-caught females years ago. I'm like, well, why don't I raise up a bunch of their babies and see if they breed and their babies breed? So it turns out they're just like any other boa. They need that 4 or 5 years, They do grow pretty fast if you want them to, but there's no need to pump them up. I mean, you can keep them small for a couple of years, and then once they get past a certain size where they're eating large mice, then they're ready to go. I don't know. To me, they're just a super cool project, and the babies all eat pinkies, regardless of what anybody says. I mean, people are used to those pulsoni babies that are eating lizards and frogs. The Viper boa babies, I would say 85-90% of them are eating pinkies right out of the gate. If you set them up properly, they need humidity. They're almost aquatic, You got to keep them wet. Everybody dries them out. I sold a bunch of them to people where they were well started, eating at least a dozen pinkies, ready to go, and months later, it died. It puked up and died. Well, you kept it too dry, and no matter, again, people are afraid to keep things wet. You wouldn't keep a ball python that wet. You wouldn't keep a boa constrictor that wet. But The Viper boa lives in a pretty wet environment.
Mm-hmm.
How many generations deep are you on that project?
3.
Wow, that's impressive. And do you see them like calming down a little bit as the generations go by, or are they still real bitey?
No.
In fact, they're more bitey. We've concentrated the bitiness.
No, if they're bitey, that means they're comfortable. You know, it's weird. Some of them are really calm, and some of them aren't. So, when they're breeding and they're in their feeding mode, they'll slash you. But what I've done is I put like little gloves on, and I'll try to handle them more. And once they get used to me handling them, they stop whipping around and trying to get you. They need calm, gentle handling. They need somebody who's not afraid. And that's the only downfall about them. They have razor sharp teeth, and they whip real quick, and they'll slice you open.
I mean, with that species, is it like a bite and let go? You getting a lot of wraps on those little guys?
No, they don't bite. They just slash you.
Oh, that's it?
Yeah. They slash you with a razor blade.
Ben knows all about that.
Sorry, something in the background. I don't even know what
carjacked?
Oh, what was that?
Are you getting carjacked?
No. Today's not today. So since I've been here, this is a very, for an abandoned bowling alley, there's always a lot going on here. There was a guy on like one of those little off-road motorcycles.
Yeah, I saw him driving behind you.
I saw him go behind me that one time, right? At one point, he was circling the car. I don't know what the fuck was going on. And then, I don't know what it was behind me, but some kind of mammal just jumped by, and I would have assumed it was a cat, but it had a very monkeyish kind of hop to it. And I tried to get a good look at it, but I don't know what it was.
Chupacabra.
It was a zombie.
It's always maybe a chupacabra, but that's wishful thinking.
Or a
I don't know what the fuck that thing was.
Baby Bigfoot.
You're right in there in
Walking on all fours. Just, I don't know how it is, but yeah, it was something. I just wish I got a better look at it. But always something good going on at the bowling alley.
We have it on video, so this is for posterity.
Not this little hopping animal. I saw it in the mirror, then over there. You didn't catch that. You just caught the motorcycle.
I saw the swamp ape drive by on the unicycle.
I missed that part. But no, yeah, we've talked about it. There's crackheads that walk through here occasionally. There's something's gonna happen one of these weeks, and I hope somebody tunes in to see it. Because something's gonna go down out here.
Yeah.
So then, because I know we're kind of teetering to the end, even though the way we're going right now, like always, feel like we go for hours. So do you have one of your books? You have one with you, prepared, ready to go?
No.
Show it off?
I don't.
Okay.
Hi, puppy.
So I just noticed, I thought you were in like an old lady's house, like Ben up there, but how many electric guitars do you have behind you right now?
Well, I was telling the guys earlier, I don't have Wi-Fi where I live, so I had to go to the local music store.
Oh, okay, same boat with me.
I'm only kidding. I have a guitar collection, yeah.
Yeah, no, awesome. Yeah. Got a lot of hobbies, buddy. A lot of hobbies. I don't know how you keep up.
Yeah.
I don't know either, man.
I think Ben had one more thing before we get out of here, though.
I have a bunch of stuff actually, but something we've talked about and before, and I'd like to get your perspective on it. And maybe I'm way off topic or whatever, but people are having trouble breeding bowlines. And what are your take on that species? I know you work with a ton of different animals. Maybe you have
I worked with them for years, and I did get them to the point to lay eggs, but I didn't get them to hatch.
Okay.
Wow.
The problem that I have personally, and I ended up getting rid of them and selling them, my building was too warm, and I tried keeping them in my office, which was cooler for the colubrids, and still that was too warm. They were just burning through calories and burning through food. They did the best when they were cool, 50s, 60s, with a hot spot to bask under. I truly believe everybody's keeping them way too friggin' warm. I know for a fact they are, because mine thrived when they were cooler. Mine were active and moving and digesting food at 55 degrees. So,
wow.
I even recorded them down into 45 degrees one or two nights, and they were still fine. So, a colubrid at those temperatures is not moving. they were moving and breeding, trying to breed, you know. So I know for a fact that the secret to those is temperature, and people keep them way too warm. And I felt that I was doing them a huge injustice by keeping them warm in my warm building. So I had a few pairs of them, and I ended up selling them off to friends, you know, guys that are in the business. And hopefully they have some success with them. And all of them were captive born, the ones I had started with that I got from Cameron and Bushmaster. I even traded a pair of boneless pythons to Pete Collin in 1996 for a pair of head pies.
Wow.
So I've been working with them for a long time. And I knew in the beginning that, you know, my brother had been to Indonesia a few times, and he had been to where the boneless pythons were. And he told me when I first got them, I got wild-caught adults from Cameron back in the 90s and early 90s. And my brother was like, you know, you got to keep those cool. They come from high up in the mountains, you know.
Mm-hmm.
So I learned, and I knew that they were cool animals, cool temperature animals, because I would feed them, and you could feed them a large meal, and they were like a king snake. They would shit it out 2 days later. No pythons do that.
Wow.
You know, no ball python and no Burmese python. No, not even a children's python does that. So their metabolism was high, even in cooler temperatures. So I know the secret to keeping them is cool temperatures with a hot basking spot that they can get to and get away from.
That makes a lot of sense, because the people that are getting close are saying they see them start developing, they feel follicles in them and stuff like that, and all of a sudden they reabsorb. And if they're burning through calories, they're going to pull that resource back and take those.
Well, also the other mistake that I made in the beginning, way back, was I was treating them like a ball python or a boa. As soon as I felt follicles, I was warming them up, thinking that would speed up the process like it does in a ball python or a boa. But it did the opposite. So once I figured that out, I was getting eggs, but none of them hatched. So
one of the things when we were talking with Ari, and he had a thing at one of the shows where he talked about, you know, Bolins and stuff like that. And some of the pictures I've seen, it seems like it's really wet where they are too. And I think, and it's just something that I haven't had them yet. And one day I think that I will, but I think that maybe they're not kept wet enough either.
Well, here's the trick. They're definitely kept too dry. They're in a high altitude cloud forest. I mean, it's probably 100% humidity.
Mm-hmm.
But, and I'm sure Ari mentioned this, they live in the ground.
Yeah.
And where they live, it's dry.
Mm-hmm.
There's no moisture. They're not sitting in moisture.
Yeah, he was saying he found almost all the nest sites on a steep incline, so that it would have massive drainage, even though they're wet. Yep.
Right. They're not sitting in a puddle, that's for sure. They're sitting on piles of moss or dried something. They're not sitting in moisture. Those snakes cannot stand being in moisture. Like, you couldn't give them a wet substrate for them to lay in. They didn't like that at all.
Mm-hmm.
But like a green tree python or an Amazon basin boa, they need humidity in the air. They cannot be sitting in it. And that's with any reptile. Any moist reptile does not like to sit in it, other than viper boas and blood pythons that have keeled scales and can handle it. You know?
So, you know, you talk about that. One product that's been really popular, not fashion product, like, you know, everyone's switching over to ReptiChip for a lot of their ball pythons. And, you know, it's not exactly sitting in wetness. You know, that's like nice little sponges. What do you keep in your ball pythons? I mean, do you think that's a good substrate for them, or do you think we're all overthinking things?
No, I think it's a great substrate. I keep them in, it depends on what caging, because I have different cages for my ball pythons, meaning they're not all in the same exact systems, because as I added on as years went by, I'm not going to throw out the old ones, but I've got some of those original Lindy Freedom Breeders that were like those metal cages with there's 3 V70s in a row, and they're 10 high, and it's like moving a truck through your warehouse.
Mhm.
I have a bunch of those, and they're screen tops. So those, in order to keep the humidity, I put cypress mulch in those, and I hose them down, to keep the whole. I hose the cypress mulch down almost every day when it's too dry. Mm-hmm. And the sealed up Vision V70s I have with the black plastic in betweens, you know what those are, right?
Yeah.
Those I keep on a drier substrate like aspen or pine or something, whatever I can get. So.
Okay. Ooh. What do you got, Ben? I know you got a couple more in you, don't you?
He does. He got it before.
You got that look on your face. You got a glow to you, by the way, man. What do you got going on? You got a lamp pointed at you? Did you take the shade off the lamp today?
Yeah, I'm tanning. I'm putting on a tanner. No, I changed my setup so it didn't look like I was at the grandma's house. Look behind me and did a lamp, and I put a lamp up, and I realized it's probably not the right lamp, but I realized that little
realized early on. I just didn't want to say anything, but yeah, man, you're glowing. Like, you're glowing big time over there.
I actually got a sunburn a couple of weeks ago, and it's still peeling. I was down in Florida, and I got sunburned pretty good. And for some reason, Ryan and I did a video earlier this week, and when I'm editing it, I'm like, wow, I'm looking like shiny. When
you're glistening, buddy, you're glowing. You're about to ovulate over there.
Could be.
Whoa!
I feel like
You're ovulating before marriage, Ben. Come on.
No ovulations. So Vin, we were talking a little bit earlier about the reptile shows. Like, how are you handling all this? Closing down of everything, and I know some people have gone to these online reptile shows, which I haven't really heard how successful they were or not. But I know Dave's a big show guy. We don't vend usually, but we do go to shows a lot. What have you been up to lately like that? How are you handling that? I know you said you don't have a lot of boas for sale at the moment, but
well, I do have boas for sale, but I don't like not having the shows. I'll tell you why, because I'm not really good on the internet. I get emails, tons of emails every day, and some people take offense when I give them short answers. But I answer every one of them, and I'm not being a prick. I'm just answering them. But a lot of, like millennials and stuff take it personally. If you don't become a pen pal and write a chapter or two from your own book. Yeah. So, and a lot of people I'll tell, I wrote a chapter about that in a book. Why don't you pick up a copy? Because I can't just rewrite a whole chapter in an email, Yeah. But what I'm getting at is when I'm face-to-face with people, I have a far better understanding of where they're coming from and what they want to do and what their intentions are with snakes. Dave knows this. You get people all the time that will email you and say, I want my first boa. Well, you're looking at a $10,000 snake. How is that your first boa? Yeah. So, but when you see people face to face and they get to know your sarcasm and your attitude and what you're about, then they start to understand, that I'm a serious guy. This is what I do for a living. I take this seriously, and stupid questions can only be tolerated for so long. I feel like a college professor sometimes. You didn't read the book. People will say to me, the worst thing is they'll send me an email and say, "Dear Vin, I read your book. It was great. How do I do this?" And I'm like, that was on page 131. Why didn't you read it? And then they take it like I'm the asshole, So I get upset with that. But face to face is so much easier because then they see what I'm doing and what I'm about. So I like the shows. I like doing the shows and talking to people and meeting with the customers that have purchased from me before, making friends. Dave and I became friends from White Plains, Mm-hmm. So it's like I have a lot of acquaintances and friends and customers from the shows, and I kind of miss it because that's how I do most of my business. I'd much rather be face to face with people than a silly email with, "Dear Vin, can you send a picture of its asshole, its tooth, its head, put it on a scale, let me know how much it weighs, then take a video of it on the lawn, then also let me know if it's friendly."
Yeah.
What's his temperament like, man? Because that's real important.
So everybody is.
Yeah, unlike Vin, I never say no to an asshole. Like I usually lead with the asshole, actually.
Especially if they bleach it, it's good to go.
Who's got that kind of time or money other than Ben over there?
I may have the time and money. I don't have the flexibility. Is my problem.
That's why you're getting married.
That's right. You're married.
From what I gather, Wayne Hill's going to have this show in Daytona in August. I don't know if they're going to make us walk around with masks, or if everybody's got to be 10 feet apart, or if I'm only going to allow to have 2 people at my table at a time. I don't know how it's going to work.
You got to wear a bubble suit. Everybody's walking around in bubbles.
Yeah.
I'm just open for business right now.
See, I've heard, because, I paid a lot of attention to what's going on, and I will say this, I generally miss the shows, but the focus I've been able to put on the collection, not having to worry about travel, we're having an amazing year right now.
Dude, it's funny you said that. It's so funny you said that, because my collection's the best it's ever been.
Yeah, it is, because what else are we going to do right now? Like, there's no more travel on the weekends, no more distractions. We're just literally going to that building every day and working, and it's perfect.
Things fall between the cracks when you're busy,
Yeah,
and
really
it's like, a snake, like, examples of some of my pine snakes. You got to feed them every 3 or 4 days. If you miss that 4th or 5th day and you skip it to the next and make it 8 days, then you put the males with them and they don't breed, and you miss a whole year, So it's like I fed them every 3.5 days, like clockwork. Bing, 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 bing. I even wrote it down on a little calendar, which I never did.
Yeah.
It's like all the corn snakes and king snakes and pine snakes are all eating exactly on schedule. They're all breeding on schedule. I never had it like that. Never. It's always been, I didn't get time to feed them that one day. I'll feed them another day and then miss it and then feed them another day. Forget it.
Yeah.
These shows are the problem, man. This is great. This is perfect.
Well, I wouldn't call them the problem. I mean, I'm like Finn. I like engaging with people face to face. The email thing, I get back to people not as fast as I should a lot of the times. I play on my phone a little bit, but I'm not on there as much dicking around as I used to be. And an email isn't dicking around, but just the effort of taking the phone out of your pocket to look or do something. It's just it's just not there. So I love going and talking to people, but Repticon had sent out an email with like all the rules they were going to have, and you're not allowed to take cash at the shows. You're not allowed to take cards at the shows. You're not allowed to have more than one person behind your table. You're not allowed to have more than, I think, one person in front of your table. Everyone's got to wear a mask. Like, I just don't want
How are you going to get paid if you don't take a card or a cash?
like PayPal transfer. They show you on your phone that they transfer money on PayPal or something or whatever. But from what I'm hearing is you have all these limitations. And there's actually Mickey is putting on a Show Me Reptile show in Springfield, Missouri next weekend. And I may or may not go. Honestly, if I go, my stock's a little low right now. And it just might not be worth the trouble. But I still kind of want to go because I just haven't interacted with anybody in a while.
Right.
But yeah, all these rules, man, I'm sorry. I just don't fucking care. I would rather have a little protest by myself than to deal with all those extra steps. And as for the Daytona show, God, I really hope there's a Daytona show. I won't be vending, but I'll definitely be heading down there if they have one. And I went to Tinley. I had one of the best times ever this past Tinley.
We were there.
All the people that I usually hang out with showed up. It was the best time ever. No distractions. It just had a great time. People made money.
I shipped all my stuff down there. It was there.
I would have set it up for you. You should have told me. I would have done a full spread for you.
Get on a plane, and a friend of mine texted me. He's like, "Vin, don't come."
Yeah. No, I contemplated not going, but fuck it. I just wanted to get out of the house. It's Tinley. I'm a creature of habit. I'm not going to miss a Tinley. But no, I don't know. I don't even. There's probably hasn't even been talk about any shows in New York anytime soon.
No, the White Plains is not going to be on until 2021 because the county center where they have it was turned into a hospital for overflow patients, and they want to. The state are crazy liberal state wants to keep that hospital in case we have a second wave, that they'll have that hospital ready to go. So they're not planning on having any county center events there until 2021.
Wow.
Well, again, not to lighten it up, I know people who've lost people. I guarantee you being where you're at, I guarantee people have been lost in this whole thing.
The only person I knew who had it personally was my father. He's 90 years old in a nursing home, and he licked it. He kicked it.
Good for him.
Yeah.
Good for him.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So he was lucky. People in his nursing home didn't make it, a lot of them. So.
Oh, I believe it. I believe it. Yeah, there's a lot of mixed things I've heard on that. Like I said, we're not getting into this debate because everyone's an asshole when you talk about it. This is like talking about religion. Like you can't please everybody. You're gonna always say the wrong thing.
Yeah.
But yeah, I don't know, man. Honestly, Ben, so have you been fishing? You able to go fishing with all this going on, or fishing's non-existent for you right now?
I haven't had a chance. I usually go fishing every June up in the Adirondacks.
Yeah, me too.
And this year the trip was canceled because I rent a house, and in order to get my deposit back, I had to cancel it 60 days before. Or if I didn't, I wasn't getting my deposit back. And I was concerned that if I didn't cancel it and I went, that New York would still be closed by June, right? So I canceled it last month to get before that 60 days. And I extended it out into August. So I'll probably do it in August sometime.
What Saranac Lake, where you guys usually posting up there?
We usually go up by Lake George. There's a bunch of small lakes around Lake George. There's Schroon Lake. There's Loon Lake. There's Brant Lake, and we rent a house up there. And I depending on what year, we go to different one every year. So I
love that region. Actually, so I sadly have not taken that trip in a few years since I've been in Missouri. That camping trip is actually right now for all my buddies. They're all, I think, upper Saranac this year, maybe lower. I don't really know. Not going, maybe not care. But I've thrown every conventional lure I'd usually use, all my go-tos. I only catch good fish on inline MEPS rainbow trout color. Every single year, that is the go-to. I've thrown everything else, but the rainbow trout MEPS kills it in that region. It's almost like, oh yeah, the little largemouth bass.
This is a Bagley's crappie.
Oh, okay.
This is my secret weapon.
Yeah. Hey,
anymore.
This will catch everything in an Adirondack lake, and this is crappie on chartreuse, so it's like a yellowy color. It's hard to tell.
Well, just like snake breeding, if you pay attention to what it's like, what they're feeding, you're gonna know what to throw.
Yeah.
I like how you have that right there, but not your book.
Yeah.
I don't have my book yet.
Yeah, no, that's okay. But no, yeah, I do miss fishing in New York, and even in Buffalo, going muskie fishing in Niagara River. We're throwing black inline spinner baits, we're throwing rainbow, we're throwing orange, all these crazy colors, and then we just started throwing ones that looked, I think it's like a horse sucker, and it's like just brown with a gold spoon, and next thing you know, it's muskie after muskie. We weren't really paying attention. We were just throwing what we see everyone else throwing. And we finally figured out what they were eating and started throwing that brown, and man, we were tearing it up. They were no longer the fish of a 10,000 cast. We were going out and bringing in like 6 to 10 muskie a day on that lure.
Dude, the lure that I used up there for muskie was a giant, looks like a giant MEP spinner, but it's really big.
Yeah.
It's black with a pink feather and a gold blade. And that thing killed muskie.
Yeah. My buddy got about, I think it was like a 45 or 40-inch or 48-inch northern pike in Saranac, throwing a little black, I think it was like a size 2 inline. I like the rainbow up there. I feel like I do good. And, occasionally you get lucky and catch a brook trout there, but I think I've only caught one brook in like 3 years ago in there. But I do like fishing that region. I'm actually really sad I don't get to take that trip like I used to. And I'm even more jealous that they're up there doing it right now. But, maybe next year.
Yeah. I love it up there, man. It's like I think I was conceived there.
Yeah. No, man. Yeah, like I said, fishing here. I've really I've filled my life with more herping than fishing nowadays. I'm still getting out of nature. I'm still doing things I love, but I'm just targeting something different.
Right.
But what can you do?
Mm.
Sorry, guys. Now we're talking fishing on a reptile podcast. If you guys still stuck around this long, this was like an absolute fuck you to you. And I apologize. But,
I can't believe your cell phone hasn't died yet.
It's been plugged in the whole time.
Well, look what's important. All right, that's
This
fine.
is very important. I knew this conversation was going to go on longer than 2 hours and 15 minutes like we usually do, so I came prepared. I wasn't taking any chances today. I didn't want to leave you guys alone with Vin.
Good plan. Hey, Vin, so you've been around, you've been, at shows and stuff. You've been to different countries. You know a bunch of people. Tell me a story when you ran into the craziest situation you've ever run into at a show.
By the way, my story was a baby being born in a bathroom, just to set the bar. You're gonna have to try pretty hard right now to impress.
I got one. I remember going to the very first National Reptile Breeders Convention. It was in Orlando it was at a Howard Johnson hotel, believe it or not. It was right next to they eventually had it at the Twin Towers hotels. So the very first one was at a Howard Johnson. I think it was 1990. And that was probably the first big reptile show ever. Prior to that, the only other reptile shows, there was one in Pennsylvania called Pottstown, Pennsylvania, done by Leonard Knapp. Did you guys go to that?
I didn't go to. I've heard of it. People have talked about that before.
That was the first reptile show. That was in the mid '80s. Leonard Knapp, great guy. He had it at a ballroom, the Sunnyside Ballroom. But what I'm getting at is, he was the first reptile show where it was like a local show. But Wayne Hill had the first international show, and that was in Orlando at the Howard Johnson, which eventually moved to the Twin Towers, and that was the National Reptiles Breeders Expo. And when I went to that convention on the Friday night, there's the icebreaker, or we just made one. Everybody went to the bar and was drinking, and I had a little name tag on, and I'm seeing people that I knew face to face, like Pete Call. I already knew at that point. Who else did I know at that point? Like face to face, the Florida guys, But there was people that you met through, snail mail and sending pictures to people, writing letters back then. It was the late '80s, early '90s. So back in the '80s, I had really long hair. I was like a hippie, but I was a clean cut hippie.
All right.
So I'm at the bar, hanging out with my brother and a couple of friends, and a guy comes up to me, and he looks at me in the face. He looks down at my shirt. He looks back up again, and he's like, "I thought you were a short little fat guy." His name was Bob Hammond. He's one of the, at the time, one of the premier Burmese python breeders. And you think, premier Burmese python. Back then, nobody bred Burmese pythons, and that was the first snake that we were all making money from. The albino Burms and even normal Burms. Mm-hmm. But Bob Hammond was a guy from Chattanooga, Tennessee that I met. He had an ad in the back of one of those. It was either Notes from Noah or Chicago Herp, one of those newsletters that was out. He had an ad, and he was selling Burmese pythons, and I became friends with him. I bought a couple normal Burmese pythons from him. And he's the one who came up to me and said, "I thought you were a short little fat guy." But yeah, that's about it. I mean, there's some more crazy stuff. We can talk about that here.
Someday. Hey, man, there's always stuff going on in the background of shows. You just don't always know about it. It's okay. Right. I've had a baby born at a White Plains show, didn't know about it. I'm sure there's been stuff
White
that's going
Plains,
on.
Really?
I don't know, man. I mean, maybe. I mean, somewhere between people stealing shit off your tables, I'm sure they're having babies around there.
Yeah.
But similar. So the first time I ever met Ben Rennick at Tinley, I was out to dinner with him, and it was kind of the same reaction because I'd always seen his company and all that stuff, but never really saw him. And when I met him, I was just like, I just figured he'd be like 50, 60 years old. Like no one would think somebody with a company that big would be such a young guy. And like you're talking about like the old sales, like one of my favorite old things to talk about, and there's people that actually collect these, was the VHS tapes that Jeff Ronnie used to make back in the day. Where he'd make a VHS tape with everything he had for sale and send it to you.
And it would be on a floral blanket.
Yeah.
Yeah, like a snake on a floral blanket. Yeah. I still one of those. Yeah.
Yeah, I remember people over the years have talked about collecting those, and I hope he has them all laying around somewhere. But no, I love that stuff. It's so much easier now. But back then, I mean, there was a lot of peculiar ways people went around selling stuff.
That's amazing.
I'm old fashioned. I like the face to face and talking to people. And that's why it's not, dude. It's not difficult to do emails and talk to people on my Facebook page. It's not. But I think it's the personability is gone, People take what you say literally, like one person kept bothering me for Argentine boas, and I'm like, they didn't even breed yet. I don't know what you want me to tell you, try me in September, I guess. I don't know. And they're like, well, I guess I'll have to take my business elsewhere. I don't have them. What business is there to talk about?
Yeah, I really hope that wasn't my fault. I sent a lot of people to you for a lot of stuff. I guarantee I probably sent 30 people over the years that were looking for Argentines to you. So yeah, I'm gonna go ahead and apologize. I probably sent some of these people your way.
That's all right. I appreciate it.
Yeah, of course. I'm sure you made at least one sale because of me.
One sale and 30 enemies.
You're pissed at me now.
I'm sure there's BOIs about you out there about your customer service.
Hey, my customer service is good, man. People who have dealt with me have had no issues. It's the ones that we don't even get to the sale part that get upset. But what am I gonna do?
Can't please everybody, man.
You know what somebody told me once? They said you can't please everybody. If you want to please everybody, sell ice cream.
Good idea.
We should do that right now.
You guys the next Ben and Jerry? Ben and Ryan?
Ben and Ryan ice cream brand, yes.
Yep.
We're gonna name every flavor after a locality boa.
Vin, you could do play a song because you have all these guitars, but you do play music. So play a song, for people when they call, they seem to be upset. I'm like, you seem upset. Why don't you just give me a little call? And then when they call, you're like,
yeah. What's your banjo situation over there? Because I feel like that's the most soothing chord you could possibly play.
You've been in the South too long, my friend.
I don't have a banjo.
No, I love banjos no matter where I live, buddy. I don't care. If I was going to go out of my way to learn how to play something, it'd be a banjo. But I'm just not going to do it.
Thank you.
Honestly, it would be for comical value, and that's it. And I'm just not sure if I need that. I think I'm
it's like having a double handlebar mustache. Like you don't need two of them. You just need one.
Yeah. But I might split it up for one of the future episodes. We're going to get a little crazy with this thing as we go on. I promise.
Let's go, man. Hey, we're on the new channel now. Anything goes.
Yeah.
So can I throw what I realize you keep on giving me a hard time about catch lines, or what do you call them? Is it catchphrases?
Catchphrase.
Yeah. So you guys realize we do have a catchphrase. We've peaked. Yeah, we've peaked, man. We just peaked. Yeah, we do this at the end of every episode when I've had enough and I want everyone to know. I just say we've peaked. Really, I'm just satisfied, and I just let everyone know that I'm good.
You're satisfied because of the camera doesn't catch your lower half.
Yeah, once it gets dark and you can't see this, and I start looking like Ben, yeah, I get the fuck out of here. Like I know when I've peaked. I've peaked.
He just hangs up and pretends he lost battery.
Yeah, I have only done that once, but that percentage is like 20% of our episodes. So not great, but we're gonna work on that. I promise. But yeah, Vin. I mean, honestly, if you guys have anything else you want to throw at him, but fuck, man, we tell you this to everybody. We will definitely want to have you back on. Hopefully, just because, like I said, I feel like we only dabbled in so many little things. We could have talked about so much more. But no, honestly, very appreciated. And I told you this early before. I'm gonna fanboy you a little bit, buddy. You've always been my favorite breeder. I love your diversity. I'm a boa fanatic. You fucking got them all. Yeah, you just always been my guy deep down, man. I talk about you a lot, I promise. But
I
honestly, thank you
appreciate
for coming
that. You know, it's one of the greatest accolades in life is to get the respect of your peers, and I think I may have reached that point in my life. So
on. Yeah, you got this guy. You got this guy.
that's all
Bro.
that matters.
Yeah, just don't tell Jeff Ronnie. Jeff Ronnie probably won't watch this, so it's gonna be okay. I don't want to break his heart. I love you too, Jeff. But Vin, there's something about you, buddy. Just always had a soft spot for you.
Thanks, man. Appreciate it.
So I
you
guess
guys want to do a? Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
I was just gonna say real quick before we sign off, if people want to find out more about you or how to get in touch with you, where are
I
we
want
going?
to get the book. Like, if someone's
Where do we
gonna
get the
go
book?
that book, where are they getting it? So we can
The
put a
book
link.
is The More Complete Boa Constrictor. It's published by Eco Universe. So you can go to ecouniverse.com and you can get it. You can get it on Amazon. You can get it on eBay. You can get it from me if we ever have shows again. I bring them to shows and sign them. So that's been the way most people have been getting them. As far as getting in touch with me, cuttingedgeherp.com or www.cuttingedgeherp.com. I've got a Facebook page, www.facebook.com/cuttingedgeherp. You can just Google Cutting Edge Herp and you'll find me. I mean, there's no other Cutting Edge Herp.
We'll put all the links in the description too.
I'm gonna link the shit out of this thing. All across the whole thing is gonna be nothing but links.
You can email me, Vin@Cutting Edge Herp.
Yeah. What and the home address and
That nobody's got that.
Got a little too far.
Yeah, now you've gone too far.
Yeah, he's got a touchy subject, man. He talks about being robbed multiple times. Now you're asking for a home address. You just don't go there.
Come on.
This will be fine.
Don't go there.
Just tell us your cell phone number right now. We'll put it down below. It's all good.
Yeah. Just know it's the most immaculate facility you've ever seen, and that's all that matters. You just put it together in your head.
Right. You can just imagine.
Yeah, just imagine. Use your imagination, buddy. We know you got one. Yeah, honestly, really great time. I fucking loved everything about this. I loved, I love talking to a lot of people about the same species because again, everyone just has their own opinion, in their own way that works. So this was great. Even your skink, man. Like I said, there's still a lot of it's not a newer species, but it's definitely a species that some people are still trying to find their own way. And I think all these new people we've been talking about that work with them are going to help a lot of people out.
Yeah. Well, the one thing I learned about this business is when I first started taking it real seriously to do it, when I knew I was going to do it as a career, I went and visited all my friends who did it for a living at that time. So that was like in the late 90s because I wanted to see how they were doing it. And what I did was I took a little bit of something from everybody. And it was a little bit of something that I thought was a good idea or thought I could duplicate that or and I took a conglomeration of everybody, put it together, and I created my own thing from it. So, and I'm passionate about herpetoculture and the things that get my feet on the floor in the morning, and that's what I work with. So, am I passionate about boas? 100%. I mean, boas are where it's at for me, and that's what everybody knows me for. I go to Europe, and everybody's like, there's Vin, the guy who wrote the book on boas. But like you were saying, Dave, underneath that, all of that is, viper boas, pine snakes, sand boas, blood pythons, tree boas. It's all stuff that I just like having. And I think that if you're passionate about something, it shows. And like you were saying too, Dave, if you pick one thing and you keep disciplined at it and you keep going with it, it's going to pay off eventually. It's the people that do this who get in this for the wrong reasons, like, oh, I'm going to breed ball pythons just to make a lot of money. And Dave, you and I both know that we know personally a lot of people that have done that, gotten in this for the wrong reasons, and they disappeared fast.
Yeah.
So it's the guys who take it seriously, are passionate about it, who have longevity and make a living at it. I'm not a rich guy. I don't make tons of money. I can pay my bills. I can go on vacation once a year with my family, but I get to work with reptiles every day. I can't ask for anything more, you know?
Yeah. No, this hobby has never been a get rich scheme by any means.
Right.
And like you said, getting in for the wrong reasons, you know, like, you know, we keep asking everybody like the beginning. And, you know, fortunately, you know, a lot of people that we brought on all say the same thing, you know, they went out and they found their first snake and they became passionate about it. And, you know, even for me, I was the same way when I was 5, 6 years old. I was in Wisconsin. I was catching garter snakes, decay snakes. I was tucking my shirt in and throwing them down my shirt, and that's how I was keeping them as I'm walking around and catching more. And then I found out about the colors and the breeding and all that soon after I got out of high school, and I was already obsessed. And then I found out about this, and it's all I ever wanted.
Right.
And, you know, it's not always like that with people. You know, some people, again, do it because there's a bottom line. And, you know, early on, you're talking about the economic side of it and how not so much certain things have to pull their weight, but, you know, there is a certain dollar amount with certain things, and it is a business. But, you know, that's not all it is for you and a lot of other people. That's just part of it because, again, you got to be able to house them. You got to be able to feed them. There's a lot to this. If you don't look at it in a financial means, I hope you have something else that's bringing in a lot of money in life that's going to handle all those bills you're creating for yourself.
Right.
So yeah, like I said, you know, it's tough to please everybody. And, you know, I'm sure some people are going to twist certain things you say, but, you know, it's, if you're passionate about it and you love it and you're in it for the right reasons, those are the guys that are in this hobby for 20, 30, 40 years.
Right.
It's the only way to be. But I'm not going anywhere. I'll be honest. I really don't want to do anything else, honestly. And like you said, we make it work. We have enough to live, and we're very content doing it.
You know, I was paid the highest compliment about maybe about 15 years ago. Eugene Bissett, we were in Daytona, and we were amongst a bunch of the older timers and the pioneers in this business. I'm not going to throw names out, but Eugene Bissett was the one who said it. What he said was, he was talking to all the people about, at the time, ball pythons were going crazy, and there was a lot of people who were in the business just for the greed part of it. And he said something to a group of people, and I was included in it. He said, you know, I have yet to meet the next Vin Russo. And somebody said, well, what do you mean by that? He's like, what I mean is I've known Vin since he's a kid, since he's 18, and he's passionate and took this to the next level. And he's the guy that I met when he was a kid and said, wow, that guy's probably going to be something one day, you know? And he's like, and now here he is 20 years later, and he's a pretty big name breeder, you know? So to me, that was the highest compliment, because it's like, I personally haven't met the next Vin Russo yet, you know? Meaning I haven't met the 18-year-old kid who's come up to me at a show and bought snakes from me, and I haven't said to myself, wow, that guy is going to be the next, you know, big thing. So it makes me worry about the future of this business, because Dave, you're in the category with me still, even though we're not the same age, but it's like you're at that point where you're getting things going and you're doing this for a living, and you know, you're a commercial breeder. That's what you're doing. You're passionate about it. But who's the guy before you? You know, it's like, where is he? A lot of these younger kids who are getting up into the ranks now, I think they're in it for the wrong reasons. You know, and a lot of these kids aren't in it because they're passionate about the snakes. They're in it because they're passionate about the money they might make.
Mm-hmm. No, there's a lot of truth behind that. And again, this is a business, and you have to want to make money to have a business.
Right.
But, you know, I think just there's a separation when you're working with living animals. You know, we're not talking about product lines right now. You know, we're talking about life. And, you know, like you said, and, you know, it's really funny because everyone has their own way of sales. And, you know, some people don't want to sell you an animal and you succeed because they look at you as future competition. But me personally, I want everyone to have a fighting chance that ever buys an animal. Like, I think everyone deserves that from the person that they're buying stuff from. And, you know, that's not always the case. You know, some people are scared of competition. I've never really looked at it that way. But,
me neither. I mean, if I did, I wouldn't have written a book about how to breed boas.
Yeah.
I mean, I could have kept all those secrets to myself, but, you know, there's a lot of good information in there, and a lot of people don't realize it. I've had plenty of people come up to me, especially Europeans, and say, Vin, I didn't breed any boas until I bred that book, and now I breed them every year. You know, so there's a good recipe in that book. And if I was worried about competitors, I never would have written it. You know, but I feel the same way you do. If everybody succeeds, then we all succeed.
Yeah, because that person you sell from is not necessarily competition, because the moment they get that $100 bill in their pocket, there's a good chance they're going to walk right back over to your table and spend that $100 bill.
Right. And we're also trying to create an industry. And it's an industry based on domesticated animals. We're up against a lot of political agenda where they constantly use the words wild animals.
Mm-hmm.
You know, like right now, there's a few bills in place. I'm on the board with PJAC, and there's a few bills in place talking about banning the sales of wild animals, banning the import and exports of wild animals, specifically reptiles and amphibians and bats. Okay, they want to throw that in because of the recent, COVID virus pandemic. But what we've got to realize is that we're creating an industry now, because we're still in the infancy of this industry. We really are. I mean, think about it. It started when, in the early 90s, maybe, people commercially breeding reptiles. To me, that's not that long ago. It really isn't. Compared to the car industry and all these other industries. But what I'm getting at is we need to emphasize the fact that we are captive breeding domesticated animals. We have nothing to do with wild animals. And every time one of these bills pops up, one of my first questions to whoever wrote the bill was, define wild animal. And they try to get attorneys involved and come up with fancy language, anything that, looks like it's from the wild. I mean, it doesn't make any sense, but the perfect example is some of these boas and ball pythons that we're breeding. There's 6-7 generations in captivity. How is that a wild animal?
Mm-hmm.
To me, that's domesticated.
Mm-hmm.
So if everybody does well and does things properly and by the book, then we'll create an industry that will be here forever. That's the way I look at it.
Yeah, there's a lot of truth behind that. I mean, it's on everybody to keep this going. One bad seed. The reality is, when you see a collection that somebody walks in on where it's, the news story of like 40 snakes melting in someone's house, that reflects badly on the entire hobby.
Right.
That affects every one of us in a way.
Yeah.
So, no, I couldn't agree more. And, I really hope this hobby has longevity. I feel like we haven't even, like you said, there's new legislation that's going to come in. There's always going to be a state that's going to have its own rules, and some things are going to be out of our control, but we're our own worst enemy in this when we're causing this to happen a lot of times.
I mean, that last Tinley Park show, the one that was in October, that was probably the biggest reptile convention I've ever seen in my entire life, and I've been to them all. I mean, at one time that Ham Germany show was the biggest.
Mm-hmm.
And that October Tinley Park show, that was gargantuan compared to any ham show I've been to. So, I mean, Ron St. Pierre summed it up best. He said it was the Comic-Con of the reptile world. It really was. I mean, the amount of people at that venue and the amount of serious reptile people, not just, people walking around like they thinking it's a petting zoo like they do sometimes at White Plains, but serious reptile people from all over the world were there. And that gave me such a thrill and such a boost of enthusiasm. Like, wow, now I've seen this business get to the point where it should be,
It's definitely blossoming for sure.
No, for sure. But, well, man, I think we're definitely going to have to wrap this up, mainly because people's attention spans. And
True.
We're going to have to make sure to put a little note on the bottom of this. This is the longest podcast we've done so far, but I definitely hope everyone had a chance to stick around to the end, because I don't think it kept getting better, man. It never peaked. We've never peaked, guys. But, no, I had a great time. And again, you guys are better at closing this out than I am. You're just more well-spoken than me. This is more your thing. So, Ron, you get to wrap this up today?
Sure, man. I don't want your mustache to get in the way of everything. So
No, of course not.
So Vin, thank you so much for spending some time with us today, man. It's been a great and very interesting podcast for us. You have quite a variety of animals, and it's super impressive that you're being so successful with all of them. Your passion definitely shines through, especially for the guitars that you're collecting. But guys, if you like this, please make sure to smash the like button. Make sure you subscribe to this channel. It's the new channel, Herp House Rock. Represent. Dave's here. He's always interesting. Ben, I don't know about that new background, man. You got to spice it up.
Okay.
Yeah. Well, just
Thanks,
just
guys.
let him come back over again, buddy.
Listen, no. He's not allowed in the house. He smells a little bit. But make sure you give us a comment. Let us know if you like this new channel. Share it with your friends. We only have 7 subscribers right now compared to our 5,000 on the other channel. So, let's lift this up. We'll share you. You share us. It's just like a whole 70s thing, man. Like, I give you a key. You give me a key. We all get subscribers.
So,
Let's
Vin,
go.
don't be scared. We're going to put this out there. Don't ignore that 7 because I know you came on here because, it's advertising and everything. This is going to be seen by people. We promise. Not just 7 fucking
It's
people.
gonna go viral.
Don't listen. They're going to share it on their page. We're going to share it on our page. This thing is going to be everywhere. Everybody wants to
It's not
listen
a
to
problem. We just started a new channel because,
We started it yesterday.
Yeah.
This is fine. We're going to get it out. No problem. It's no problem at all. Thank
All
you
right,
so much, guys, for
Thanks
tuning
for
in. I
having me
appreciate
on,
it.
man.
I almost want to apologize now. But,
What?
no,
that was a
honestly,
great
that was
comment.
great. Don't worry, you're gonna be fine. Just don't email Vin about anything stupid, please. Just nothing about the podcast.
World's all
Don't be stupid. Read the book first for real. Okay.
Yeah.
It's on Amazon. You jerks.
Yeah, knowledge is power, guys. Get the book. But all right, awesome, guys.
All right. Thank you so much, Vin.
Thanks, guys. Thanks for having me, man. Send me a link. I'll post it on my page.
Right on.
We're gonna need you to.
And I hope you like Dave always makes the thumbnails. So
Yeah. Get real weird with it, Dave. Real weird.
Oh, me?
Yeah.
Yeah.
You're the
Yeah,
thumbnail.
well, I already have an idea. We're gonna be just fine. So this goes for everybody. You probably haven't seen this yet, Finn. I always do these really outrageous little art things like the cover art. If you want to get bored and maybe send me a couple selfies later, that'd be great. So I don't have to stalk you online and find pictures of you smiling. Even angry pictures are good, man. Change it up a little bit. Give me some variety. I'm gonna have to do it all on my own, and that might not be good for you.
Dave really wants full body shots. Like he's tired
No,
of
I don't want full body. No, we don't need a full body shot. I just need what's important, and that's what you got going on right here, buddy.
All right, man.
All
So
right.
thank you again, honestly.
All right, guys. No problem, man.
Thanks, man.
thank you so much.
Thanks.
All right.